Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, we invite you to listen to part 2 of the series. Chapter 15. The only way to change one's destiny is by desecrating etiquette and law. The dark energy evaporated from the Imperial Armory. The beast-themed chain armor had vanished from the metal hanger and had encompassed itself on Xia Ji. The size was just right, fitting him snugly. This demonic armor and dark halberd were clearly not categorized as common weapons, they belonged with the immortal weapons of misfortune of this world. Xia Ji had read about this in an ancient book. It told of how these immortal weapons of misfortune were different from common weapons because most of them had developed embryos of intelligence, as if they were fetuses growing in a mother's womb. A fetus would absorb nourishment from its mother's womb in the first 10 months of development. Similarly, the intelligence contained within these immortal weapons of misfortune was not born out of thin air, for they needed nourishment as well. However, most of these weapons did not receive enough nourishment, therefore, they could not be birthed. After all, most of those in this world who had their hands on these immortal weapons of misfortune were mere mortals. How could common men such as these be worthy enough to lay birth to the intelligence of a divine demon? That was why the masters of these immortal weapons of misfortune kept changing hands, which resulted in the embryo of intelligence gaining minimal nourishment. The corruption of heart and mind that assaulted these men were merely symptoms similar to fetal movement. The fetus was hungry and was reminding its parents that it needed to be fed. However, most warriors were spiritually weak. How were they capable of enduring the weapons, please? After a few changes in masters, most immortal weapons of misfortune would either be lost in the rivers of history or sealed shut in a location where the sun does not shine. With that, the embryo of intelligence would end up in a deep slumber. Right then, Xia Ji had awoken both the great darkness halberd and the demonic armor that had been bound and sealed by the 14 golden Sanskrit chain. He searched through his memory for the information of how to get the weapon to recognize its master from the ancient book he once read, to possess, bond through blood. To put it simply, one would need to possess it first and later get it to recognize its master through blood. Clearly, it was not easy to possess such a weapon. Take the great darkness halberd for example, if it was not for Xia Ji's Trailokia dhyana that bestowed powerful spiritual strength, he would have been incepted by the demonic energy. The same could be said of the mysterious demonic armor. Xia Ji flicked out 2 drops of blood. Whiz! Whiz! A drop of blood was shot toward the beast-themed chain armor. It was absorbed quickly, like water soaked up by a sponge. The dark smoke drifting around the demonic armor completely vanished and it turned into an incredibly mighty and sturdy-looking armor. It had recognized its master. The other drop of blood was absorbed by the tip of the dark halberd, but the dark halberd made no change at all. All of a sudden, Xia Ji felt a strong suction on his right finger where it was bleeding. It felt as if something was trying to suck his blood dry, and the source of it was coming from the dark halberd. How dare you? He grunted coldly as his right hand shot straight toward the dark halberd. As he grabbed it, his palm grew a few times larger, once again demonstrating the 18 levels of hell suppression form, where the night was haunted by 100 parading ghosts. However, he had just managed half a grip on the dark halberd when the sensation of the suction suddenly disappeared. The demonic energy had been completely restrained and the great darkness halberd's head slumped to the side, falling into the arms of Xia Ji obediently. It had recognized him as its master as well, and transformed into a dark, ice-cold halberd of 18 feet. We have news. A loud voice making an announcement came from afar. When Xia Ji walked out of the Imperial Armory, an elite guard was already half-kneeling near the entrance of the courtyard. There was a letter held in his hands. The guard heard the movement and raised his head to look toward the door. An exceptionally majestic-looking man was walking out from the door. His dark hair was dancing behind him and there was a look of calmness in his eyes. He was clad in a beast-themed chain armor while his hand gripped the gigantic, black halberd which was 18 feet long. He exuberated an aura that was strangely contrasting. It felt like he was Buddha, yet also demon-like. He looked like a vicious general of the ages, but he was also an imperial prince kept hidden deep within the palace. It was a contrast that had brought upon a shocking sensation and the guard was left dumbstruck from it. It was only when Xia Ji came near toward him that the guard gave a start and quickly said, reporting to the marshal, "There is news from the front line." Xiaji grabbed the envelope, tore it open, and glanced at it. He kept the letter and said lightly, "You may take your leave. Give an immediate report on news of the battle at the front line." "Yes, Marshal." The shock experienced by the guard had yet to subside. He lowered his head and bowed as he slowly retreated until he reached a corner before rushing off quickly. They're already within 300 miles. That last barrier at Tongguan would probably only last half a day at most. Xiaji silently calculated the time and walked alone toward the imperial harem. The Cloud Palace located within the imperial harem was a place of heavenly bliss on earth. Generations of imperial emperors of the Shang dynasty had implemented many fantastic ideas into Cloud Palace, as they spent time there extravagantly. It was a place of play and pleasure for the imperial emperor and his concubines, and was a forbidden area for all outsiders, including imperial princes. The eunuch in charge of guarding the front of the palace had not sensed anything amiss when he saw someone coming. He called out in a bemused tone from afar, "Seventh Imperial Prince, you should not be here. Many of the imperial concubines in the imperial harem may not have left with His Highness, but they are still your elders. You need to properly greet them when you see them. Moreover, only the imperial emperor is allowed into the Cloud Palace. You being here does not fit ETI." Before he could finish his sentence, a sudden slash appeared on his neck. Xiaji pulled back the dark halberd and did not glance at the eunuch guarding the entrance. He walked past him in large strides while the wound on the eunuch's neck suddenly made gurgling sounds as fresh blood spewed madly from the wound. Why did the blood flow out in such an aggressive manner? It was because the dark halberd had produced a strong suction. It took just a few steps before the eunuch was lying in a pool of blood. The quintessence blood within his body transformed into a red snake as it slithered from his neck and leaped through the air to be absorbed into the dark halberd. When the halberd had a taste of its wonderful flavor, it actually let out a gentle moan that was jumbled up with the sounds made by the wind and snow. Xiaji stood at the entrance of the Cloud Palace. The door was made entirely of glaze and the engravings on it emphasized its wasteful extravagance. He glanced at it briefly and pushed the door open. The only way to change one's destiny is by desecrating etiquette and law. A group of beautiful palace maids was arranging flowers and conducting canvas drawing in the Cloud Palace. When they heard the commotion and saw someone entering, they went pale with fear. Xiaji said directly, "Fill the heavenly pool with warm water and light 30,000 sticks of sandalwood incense." The palace maids were aware of current conditions and immediately pulled themselves together. They did not dare say much and quickly lowered their heads as they obeyed his instructions. The 9th dragon's head started bubbling warm spring water. Not long after, all 3,000 sticks of sandalwood incense were also lighted one by one. Xiaji took off his armor, but it mysteriously transformed into dark smoke as it lingered around him. Xiaji could not help laughing. This truly is a demonic armor that has been channeled with intelligence. "Stay here on your own for now." He patted the beast-themed chain armor and spoke to it as if it was a fellow human being. It was only then that the demonic armor retreated on his own and turned into a whiff of dark smoke as it went toward the sidelines of the 9th dragon heavenly pool. The dark halberd was also left at the side. The 33 prayer beads were also placed together. He had not expected for the dark smoke to push them away upon placing it down. It made sure that they were far away from the demonic armor and the dark halberd. Xiaji bathed in this extravagant heavenly pool as he completely relaxed his mind and spirits. He had read many books in the past 2 days and had cultivated many skill-type skill beads, which now appeared slowly within his primal spirit. Many of the skill beads were white and green. Only a few were blue. Most of these skill beads were second or third-rated skills in the martial arts world. Even if he achieved the 9th level with them, it would be worthless. The skill beads formed a tidy line as they floated in the air one by one. They crisscrossed. Xiaji went through every skill bead. Some of the beads sank while others continued floating in the air. An hour later, Xiaji had a rounded number of 100 skill beads in his primal spirit. The young imperial prince took a deep breath and all of a sudden, all thoughts were lost within his spirits. All preordained fates and the upcoming battle left his mind and went to a faraway place. A supreme meditative mind escalated within him. A spiritual strength as wide as a river filled him with indescribable wonder and mystery. It felt like God, and it felt like the demon. As his spiritual strength achieved its climax, he used these 100 skill beads. After the white, green, and blue skill beads were crushed open in his primal spirit one by one. They were supposed to flow all over his body and allow his heart, his skin, bones, muscles, and every internal organ within him to accept the transformation brought upon by the 9th level power of the skill beads. However, that did not happen. It was because, at the point of being crushed, 3 huge Buddha forms had suddenly appeared around him, surrounding him in a triangular formation. All 3 of the Buddhas pointed with their hands toward the center, right between the eyes of the imperial prince. The past, present, and future, great wisdom and deeper mediation. It propelled the numerous crushed skill beads between his eyes to be guided by this strong spiritual strength, and they started to slowly fuse. Chapter 16. We were just abandoned. Spiritual strength may not be able to be perceived directly like vigor path inner vitality was, but it could meld with heaven and earth, creating Buddhist instruments, dispel and transform evil energy, and fuse skills. However, this sort of fusing was not without its restrictions. That was why Xia Ji had selected 100 second or third-rate skill beads that involved using weapons of length. To put it in another way, the skill beads he chose had to be simple and at the same time, they had to be related to using weapons of length. One cannot be without the other. This was the reward he reaped. For reading more than 1,000 books throughout the snowy nights without sleep or rest. With the help of his formidable spiritual strength as a mediator, the 100 skill beads made out of mainly white and green slowly fused as they formed a vortex. In the end, they solidified into one light purple skill bead, 100 form, exclusive, 9th level. It's just a light purple color. Looks like adding even more ordinary skills won't help with breaking through to superior dharma. Xia Ji was slightly disappointed. He glanced at the word in the brackets again and a realization dawned on him. Exclusive means that I must be the only one possessing this dharma and no one else can have it. Besides that, I can also continue with comprehending it to further enhance the skill level. That isn't too bad. 100 form is to self-cultivate hundreds of ordinary skill sets to the 9th level, and later discard the impurities so only the essence remains. After that, the essences will be fused into one and cultivated hundreds of times over to turn into a skill. This would reduce many gaudy and unnecessary actions. With a weapon of length at hand, I can use all of those skills. With that, I can utilize the dark halberd to unleash my full strength. Xia Ji experienced the proficiency level of the 100 form in his mind and muscles. It was not long before the fatigue from fusing the skills set in. He had finished the last of his preparations, so he decided to empty his body and mind and went into a status that was tensed yet relaxed, excited yet serene. He leaned backward as he enjoyed the water flowing from the 9th dragon head and the fragrant clouds created by the incense. 3 to 4 inches of white silky fog drifted about quietly on the floors of Cloud Palace while outside the palace, it was snowing heavily. This was the favorite weather of Guifang's frost giants. The palace maids and eunuch had quickly spread the message of the 7th imperial prince barging into Cloud Palace earlier on. The concubines left behind had slowly assembled there. They saw the glazed door shut tight, as well as the eunuch lying in the pool of blood. For a eunuch who was entrusted to guard Cloud Palace, he would undoubtedly have a pretty good hand in martial arts, but he had still ended up dead. Everyone at the imperial harem looked at each other. The news of the heir apparent dying in battle and his army of 100,000 obliterated while the exotic tribes were close by as they approached to lay the city under siege could not be kept under wraps. It had now spread throughout the imperial palace. The commoners may be oblivious to the truth, but everyone in the imperial palace was aware of the dire situation. Even though they knew there was no way of escape because the carriages in the imperial palace were all gone, a few doors in the palace were still being guarded heavily by soldiers to the death. The imperial emperor could leave. The imperial city could be besieged. However, they would still need to die rather than submit, fight to the death and to have an imperial prince guard the city. This way, it would save the grace of the imperial family and give the soldiers of the Shang dynasty a great uplift in spirits and leave a spark burning in them. When spring arrived and the snow melted, they would be able to gain the favor of the people and it would be time to counterattack and take back the city. Everyone who was left in the palace had been given up as a sacrifice. Some had accepted this, but others had not. It did not matter if they had accepted the situation or not as right now as they were all shrouded in frightened panic. All those in the imperial harem looked at the other side of the glazed door. What did the 7th imperial prince, who was left here as a scapegoat, plan on doing? Was he looking to enjoy life to the fullest before his death? There were a few pretty concubines who began contemplating going through the door and servicing him. If the 7th Imperial Prince chose to escape, there might be a chance he would take them. However, the women did not dare to do this so blatantly in front of each other. There were many outside Cloud Palace, but it was dead quiet. Report. A voice could be heard from afar. As Xia Ji had given instructions earlier, this elite guard was able to enter the Imperial harem. When he saw the bevy of beauties in the Imperial harem, he quickly lowered his head and did not dare to stare. He half knelt in front of Cloud Palace and said loudly, reporting to the marshal, "There's urgent news from the front line." The voice of the Imperial Prince came from behind the glazed door, "Go on." The elite guard was taken aback. This was classified military news. There was no precedent of announcing something like this in public. However, he could not disobey a direct order from the marshal. He tore the letter open and read it out loud, "Tongguan has been breached. Guifang's army is now within 100 miles and they will arrive at the imperial capital in 4 hours at most." Understood. Hundreds of refugees are coming in from the west as they are escaping toward the imperial city in hordes. General Deng would like to know from the marshal about what to do with them. Let him do as he sees fit. The guard was slightly stunned but replied, "Understood." With that, he retreated with his head lowered. As the palace maids, eunuchs, and concubines heard the latest news, it no longer mattered to them that outsiders were allowed into the imperial harem. They looked at each other and the situation descended into chaos quickly. None of them wanted to die. Everyone wanted to leave, everyone wanted to escape, but no one could. The imperial emperor had considered this. Xia Ji would have been one of those who had wanted to escape, which was why the steward was left behind to guard the imperial capital. Unexpectedly, the steward had 3 of his limbs broken but Xia Ji did not escape. The concubines thought quickly as each of them threw themselves toward the door of Cloud Palace as they shouted through the glazed door. 7th Imperial Prince, the exotic tribes are not to be trifled with. It would be the best strategy to retreat first and make careful plans. 7th Imperial Prince, I'm Beauty Wang, Imperial concubine. You really liked me when she was still alive, and I've always been privately concerned about your well-being. 7th Imperial Prince, even if you aren't thinking for yourself, you need to consider the 9th Imperial Princess. Once we leave the Imperial City, we'll do everything within our power to put in a good word for you. 7th Imperial Prince. The voices rose one after the other. The exotic tribes would arrive at the imperial capital in 4 hours. What would that mean? Everyone present understood the impact clearly. Hell on earth was about to befall them. Right now, the only one who could make an early escape and bring them along was the 7th Imperial Prince who was now in Cloud Palace. The palace maids wept, the concubines were in a panic mess, and the eunuchs were terrified. As there were too many people pushing from the back, the glazed door was subsequently pushed open. The concubines at the front dove into Cloud Palace. It really did look like heaven within as the cloudy mist wafted about. In the haziness of it all, a divine yet devilish figure slowly got up. The figure was clad in a beast-themed chain armor and his hand clutched an 18-foot dark halberd while wearing a 33-piece prayer bead. There was something forceful about this figure that compelled everyone who wanted to continue speaking to hold their tongues. All they could do was watch him walk out of Cloud Palace, carrying the halberd over his shoulder while striding further and further away. No one dared to run after him. The 9th Imperial Princess was dolling herself up in front of the bronze mirror. She took special care at the thought of the possibility of this being her face during death. She patted some blush on herself and took out a long box from below her bed. She removed a dagger in a white shark scabbard from the box and tried pulling it out. The cold glow from the dagger chilled the air around it. It was clearly very sharp, more than capable of piercing through the heart in one stroke. Xia Xiaosu was making sure to keep it close to her when there was a knock on her room door. A familiar voice could be heard from outside the door, saying something she had not expected. "I'm hungry." Xia Xiaosu was momentarily stunned, but cocked her head to the side and smiled. "What do you want to eat?" Xia Ji said from outside the door, "Mutton soup." "I'll make it for you." "Wait a minute." "Huh. Don't put any pepper in it. I'm afraid I might suddenly need water halfway through the fight." Xia Xiaosu laughed and gently replied, "Very well." Chapter 17. Good night. Reporting to the marshal, the refugees are flooding into the imperial capital in hordes and even the commoners have found out about the exotic tribes coming. It's too late to escape. General Deng and city lieutenants from different parties are sending men to maintain order. Some of the young men among the commoners have volunteered courageously to defend the city. General Deng has made a special arrangement for this and has distributed weapons to them. Xia Ji's voice was casual as usual. Understood. Update me later on what happens next. Beneath the roof. The sky was dark. Xia Ji took off his armor and placed the demon halberd against the corner of the wall. His prayer beads hung on a branch that was heavy with snow. He lit a candle and sat on the small purple sandalwood tea table while waiting for Xia Xiaosu. Xia Xiaosu had yet to return when another elite guard in charge of updating the news came running from afar while holding onto a lantern. Reporting to the marshal, Guifang's army is now 30 miles outside of the city, but there are still many refugees. General Deng wants to close the city's gates, but many of the commoners are doubting him as they think he is planning to shut the remaining refugees out of the city and send them to their deaths. General Deng has executed a few dozen people before finally closing the city gates, but there are still many refugees who couldn't make it into the city and those people have started cursing us from beneath the city. Xia Ji replied, understood. Update me again later. The elite guards hesitated before sighing and said, yes, Marshal. Amid the snow stood Xia Xiaosu, who looked just like she did 2 years ago. She was holding a red, wooden rice box as she knocked on the door and entered with a smile. She sat down opposite her older brother and took out the mutton soup from the rice box, and 2 bottles of fine wine. They had a very quiet meal. They were halfway through the meal. Another set of urgent footsteps arrived at the door, followed by a voice calling out, report. It was not long before another elite guard bearing news half knelt in front of the door. Reporting to the marshal, the exotic tribes have started attacking the city. General Deng has yet to spot the frost giants, but these giants are good at hiding in the snowy winds and are unpredictable. Xia Jie drank a mouthful of hot soup and paused for a moment before replying, understood. Update me again later. The vague sound of people killing could be heard from afar. The entire imperial city was in turmoil. Some of the concubines had started lighting incense and praying to Buddha in the imperial palace while others were crying. Some wanted to escape but had to face the bitter reality after making a huge scene. Xia Xiaosu drank her soup quietly. She raised her head to glance at her older brother under the candlelight. He was always so calm. Even if heaven and earth were about to fall apart, he would still be this way. Her heart quietened along with the peacefulness he brought about. Reporting to the marshal, Guifang has stopped attacking the city and has now made camp 20 miles away. However, one of their generals is standing firm with his sword and is inviting challengers to fight him right outside the city. 5 of our army's best generals have gone on to fight him one-on-one, but have all been killed and he left while roaring with laughter. The morale in the city has now gotten worse. General Deng has ordered for torches to be set up every 100 meters outside the city to light up the view to prevent an ambush by the frost giants. Understood. Update me again later. Marshal, General Deng is asking when you plan to head to the city's walls. Tomorrow morning. Why? You may leave. Yes, Marshal. When the elite guard left, Xia Xiaosu said, Big brother, why don't you head there tonight? The morale of the frontliners are low, but if you appear, it will boost their spirits. Xiaosu, do you think I should guard the city? Isn't that the reason why you stayed behind? Xiaosu, let me ask you this. If the city is successfully guarded, what would happen to you and me? There was a perplexed look on Xia Xiaosu's face as she started thinking about this. She had clearly not thought about this. Xia Ji did not wait for her answer. He sipped the wine while saying soulfully, the imperial emperor would return and I would give my life at the front line. You would be married off to Tujue and no one would think whatever we did was significant or meant anything at all. The commoners and the soldiers, all of them would believe that they were the ones who had guarded this city. Big brother, isn't that a good thing? No, it's not. Xia Xiaosu. You may think I'm cruel or selfish, but I've never planned to guard this city, nor do I plan to save anyone. If we stop the exotic tribes from killing, if the city doesn't experience hopeless desperation, if blood does not flow like a river, how could anyone recognize my importance? I don't want fame and fortune, I don't want the respect and fear of others. What I want is to use the city and change both our destinies. What has anyone else got to do with me? Big brother, Xia Xiaosu was shocked, but after a brief thought, she realized that her big brother was just going to the front lines as a mascot. She should let him boast all he wanted. That was why she bit back the argument she wanted to make and simply smiled, no matter what happens, I'll stand by your side. Xia Ji gave a warm, gentle look at the young girl in front of him. He held her head with both of his and their foreheads touched close together as he whispered, "Good night." Xia Xiaosu had a million things she wanted to say, but she voiced none of them. All she did was said quietly, "Good night." Morning arrived. The frost giants did not attack the night before. Clearly, they had yet to arrive. Guifang's superior general, Qi Kuei, rode a huge wolf as he continued his challenge outside the city. This general spoke the language of the Central Plain as he bellowed, "Is the Shang dynasty not a great and proud country? Isn't there anyone who can take up my challenge? Good-for-nothings. You're all just good-for-nothings." He raged at the opposition mockingly. The morale gradually dropped among the soldiers guarding the imperial capital as right outside the snowy grounds of the city were 5 heads brought along by Qi Kuei. All 5 of these severed heads belonged to great generals of their army. They had all died in the hands of Qi Kuei yesterday night. Right then, in the army's tent, Deng Ju had not slept for an entire night. He looked around. There was only silence. Someone suddenly entered the tent as a trusted soldier sent word. The master of the Lu family from the capital city, Lu Jiang, is willing to strike down Qi Kuei outside the city. Lu Jiang was a renowned swordsman within the capital city. He was famous for the purple lightning sword technique and had killed many powerful bandits. He had even gained a strong reputation for winning many martial arts competitions. When Deng Ju heard Lu Jiang's name, he knew that it was a sign that well-known families hailing from the martial arts world were willing to help with defending the city. He got up in delight and quickly headed outside as he shouted from afar, "Master Lu, you've come from a long way. Welcome." Xia Ji had not only regained his spirits but was also in peak condition after enjoying the incense, taking a bath, changing his attire, and having a good sleep. He gripped his 18-foot demonic halberd as he rode on a large horse and passed the streets. 1,000 guards followed behind him in an orderly line. Xia Xiaosu followed on horseback beside him as well. She glanced at her older brother now and then. Somehow, this felt weird for her. She was still unable to connect her brother who studied Buddhist scriptures with this foreboding figure currently riding next to her. A booming sound of drumming loud enough to make the heavens tremble could be heard from the front. It did not take long before the drumming stopped, following which the entire city wall fell silent once again. It was clear that another general sent out by the Shang dynasty was slain. The cursing and roaring laughter made by the exotic tribes could be heard from afar, but Deng Ju kept the gates shut and stayed in. He did not send anyone else to their deaths. Already 19 were dead. Even the master of the Lu family was slain. A swordsman such as the Lu family master was obviously not used to the savage charge and kill style of his opponent. Even though the Lu family master had excellent sword technique, he was only able to endure 3 rounds of blows before being slashed in half by Qi Kuei. When Guifang had breached the city, they had seized many of the Shang dynasty's weapons that were used to attack cities. Right now, they had pushed out catapults obtained from Tongguan, placing them in formation from afar as they loaded the weapons with rocks and flung the projectiles. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At that moment, gigantic rocks flew through the air as they soared past the city's wall, flying straight toward the imperial capital. Boom. The rocks exploded within the city and created utter chaos as the commoners ran hectically deeper into the city like tides returning to the sea. Suddenly, one of these gigantic rocks hurtled toward a street not far from Xia Ji. Beneath the gigantic rock was a little girl who was sobbing loudly. It looked like she was separated from her family. The little girl was about to be smashed into a lump of meat when a sudden dark figure zoomed past. The guards immediately noticed the 7th imperial prince had vanished from his horse. In one swift motion, Xia Ji grabbed the little girl who was scared out of her mind with his left hand as he rushed in at a rapid speed. He placed the little girl down and tousled her hair as a woman came running toward them from afar, calling out, "My little girl." When the little girl heard the familiar voice, she turned to look at the voice. She broke out in sobs as she ran toward the woman and leaped into her arms. The woman had not seen what transpired. When she saw the horrifyingly foreboding figure, she quickly carried her daughter and left in fright. Unperturbed, Xia Ji returned to his horse. The situation was not tragic enough yet and he was not in a rush to exit the city. Xia Xiaosu smiled. Big brother, you said so yourself yesterday that you won't care about saving people, yet you saved someone today. Do men often like saying things they don't mean? Her big brother's movements were truly quick, although being this fast would not be of much use. Even an imperial princess such as her was aware that the most important factor to have during a confrontation in battle was strength. Chapter 18. The city would be destroyed when faced with a great army. When Xia Ji arrived at the city gates, the morale all round had already dropped to the lowest point. Someone shouted out, "The 7th Imperial Prince is here." The people around started to make a commotion as each of them squeezed forward to get a better look. They saw a formidable-looking Imperial Prince in black armor walk toward them on the stone path. Behind the Imperial Prince was a splendidly dressed Imperial Princess, followed by 1,000 severe-looking guards. The sight of the Imperial family making a personal appearance at the front lines gave the soldiers guarding the city a boost of confidence, and morale among them started to build up gradually. Xia Ji followed along the curving bluestone steps leading toward the top of the world. Eunuch Mei and the steward were waiting for him. The steward, who was sitting in a wheelchair, nodded at him with a sneer. He said nothing. Today was the day they would die. Whatever that needed to be said, could be said in the netherworld. Regardless, the Imperial Emperor's prediction was about to come true. The only difference was that it would include sacrificing his own life as well. Deng Ju was stunned when he saw the 7th Imperial Prince's formidable-looking armor and weapon, but he quickly pulled himself together as he personally led the Imperial Prince and Princess into the only little tower on the city walls. The tower was filled with fine liquor. He asked, "Your Highness, does this place work for you?" "It's very good." "In that case, you may stay here. I'll be going." After Deng Ju left, Xia Ji stood within the tower on the city gates as he looked down on the battlefield. The snow gleamed white as bodies piled up. It was like witnessing hell. Close to millions of refugees outside the city had been captured by the Guifang army. The army killed some every day in an act of provocation, with what seemed to be at least 1,000 victims every time. Xia Xiaosu leaned on the window of the tower and cried as she watched. Sob, 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 sob. The crying got louder as the makeup on her face soon got blemished. Xia Ji asked in astonishment, "What are you crying about?" "Xia Xiaosu, it's so sad that so many people died." Xia Ji reached out to pull his sister into his arms and gently rubbed her eyes. "Stop crying." Xia Xiaosu fell silent obediently, but her tears continued flowing as she watched the mountains of bodies pile up amidst the bloody sea beneath the city with her messy face. A slight change seemed to be happening to the Guifang army from afar. From within the drifting snow, dozens of giants, 5 or 6 meters tall, appeared. The skin of these giants was a slight mystical blue. Heavy drifting snow flew about around them. In their hands were spiked clubs 20 feet long. They wore skulls around their necks, some belonging to human beings while some were from wild beasts. Are those the frost giants? They're actually using skulls as accessories. Ancient books explain that those are their proudest spoils of war. They use it to display their imposing power and prestige. Normally it would be made up of enemies who were in challenging battles with them, or powerful people from tribes and cities they have conquered. Only these people had the right to become their skull accessories. Like you and me, for example. Xia Jia looked at his pale-faced younger sister as he laughed. Xia Xiaosu trembled in fright as her tears stopped flowing. She did not want her head to be chopped off after death and later flayed and dried into an accessory. The frost giants brought upon a fresh round of fierce battle. These frost giants lived up to their names as the snow and wind yielded to them. Neither sword nor spear could hurt them and they did not bother to hide as they walked directly toward the city gates. Deng Ju's voice roared from the city's wall immediately, "Release the arrows." Thousands of bows could be heard firing in that instant. The frost giants paused for a moment as the arrows landed on them along with the snow. There were clear ding sounds as the arrows struck. However, the arrows could do nothing more than momentarily stop the giants in their steps. Once the rain of arrows stopped, they continued moving forward. Did it wound them? Not at all. The arrows could not even pierce through the icy snow armor's defense, much less even touch the skins of the giants. Big brother, what are they planning to do? Xia Ji said, they are, of course, planning to blast open the city gates with their spiked clubs. They have solid defense and brute strength, what need is there to do anything elaborate? Xia Xiaosu asked, why are there only a dozen or so giants? Didn't the front lines report 3,000 frost giants? Otherwise, the heir apparent and his huge army of 100,000 would not have been obliterated in just one night ambush. Xia Jia gave it some thought and held his chin in his hand as he replied, the ancient books said that these giants usually do not like to be too far away from their base. This would mean it is possible that many of these giants returned to their base after sieging the wolf restraining pass. Those who are here now are possibly giants who have a particularly adventurous spirit. Xia Xiaosu could not help but rolled her eyes as she jeered, what adventurous spirit? Xia Ji replied seriously, self-breakthrough, being a pioneer, to be enterprising and innovative. Xia Xiaosu burst out laughing. If Xia Ji could see through this situation, then so could Deng Ju. The army's strong shot crossbows now aimed for the giants below the city. Thick volleys of powerful arrows sliced through the wind and snow as a sharp sonic sound rang through the air, piercing across the sky as they shot toward the giants. The icy snow armor shattered. However, the power of the shots all but wore off upon meeting its target. There was not much force left when the arrows came into contact with the giants' skins, which rendered them useless. A look of inevitable dread could be seen in the eyes of the soldiers guarding at the top of the city as they watched the frost giants closing in. All they could do was continue aiming at the giants as they let loose more arrows. As for the young men who were helping to defend the city, they had long lost their initial courage and vigor. These monsters, how can we possibly win? They aren't human at all. It doesn't matter who goes up against them, there is no way these monsters can be killed. As the frost giants got nearer, more panicking voices could be heard. Even Deng Ju had done everything he could. Besides that, there were many renowned families, and those from the Brotherhood of Martial Artists who were helping to guard the city looked on with unrestrained terror as they watched the movements of the giants. A swordsman suddenly said, sorrowful divine monk from Lane Temple has great power and he possesses a Buddhist instrument as well. Who can convince him to come here and defeat these giants? The steward, who was in the wheelchair, sneered in his heart. Lane Temple had long predicted that this would be a major catastrophe for the imperial city. They had closed their doors during this period while many monks had claimed their desire to spread the word of Buddhism to the south, thus left alone with the imperial emperor. How would it be possible for sorrowful divine monk to get involved with such a destiny? Another middle-aged man from a renowned family, who was holding onto an iron sword, said, I heard that the great scholar of the imperial court, Lu Qi, cultivates in the great auspicious aura and was bestowed the divine scholarly instrument of the demon-slaying whip. If he was here, he would surely be able to slay these giants. The steward gave a condescending smile when he heard this. Lu Qi would never do something he knows he could not do. The Qi in his name was derived from the Chinese saying of, emulate those with wisdom and self-reflect when meeting those without wisdom. Tn, the word Qi in Chinese means to look toward or emulate in this phrase. That was why when the news was received about the exotic tribes forcing their way in ruthlessly, he had suggested to the imperial emperor overnight, those who do something they know they could not do, are foolish. Those who do not do something they know they could not do, are wise. Your Highness, you are now in a position of grave danger, why not build a new capital in the south and build your army in the next year? Wait for the right time and place for us to exact our revenge. The imperial emperor accepted the suggestion and Lu Qi was now at the imperial emperor's side, protected and surrounded by an army of 50,000. He must be thousands of miles away by now. The rest of the people here did not escape because the news was either held back from them, their families and businesses here were too big to make the move, or the city gates were locked and they could not escape, which was why they had to stay on for the brutal fight. The steward may look calm on the surface but he was sneering wickedly in his heart. The world under the heavens came merrily together because of beneficial gains, and the world under the heavens fell apart with disorder because of beneficial gains. He looked toward the tower afar and could vaguely spot two figures within. Seventh Imperial Prince, death was awaiting him. It was only with his death that His Highness's mission would be considered complete and the steward could finally fulfill the grudge he held. He cocked his head toward Eunuch Mei and said, Eunuch Mei, if the 7th Imperial Prince dies, send me to the heavens with one stroke and make your escape. On the other side, Deng Ju had sent out soldiers who were prepared to die. They had huge shields and long spears in their hands to defend the city gates and, at the same time, more siege weapons of war had been added onto the top of the city wall. Gigantic and powerful crossbows, catapults with flaming rocks had all made their appearances. When Guifang saw the city gates open, thousands of vanguards riding on wolves rushed toward the direction of the refugees. There was no escape route for the refugees and they could only run toward the gate with all their might when they saw the city gates open. A bloody battle started once again, much like a meat-grinding machine amidst the windy snow. Chapter 19. They may appear mediocre, but that is only until the fat lady sings. War was nothing short of hell. The 9th Imperial Princess wept from the start of the first battle to the next as she witnessed hell unfold before her eyes. Xia Ji finally could not take her tears and stood up to walk out of the tower. He picked a vat of hard liquor and approached the sidelines of hell. The sky above the imperial city was iron gray and clouds accumulated over it in dense pressure, much like an ink painting of low-hanging mountains being bound mid-air between the great powers of heaven and earth. This time, the imperial city's defense managed to hold up once again, but the number of casualties was now incalculable. Both doors of the city gates had deep indentations and spear holes. The doors could be barely shut tight. Many random heavy objects were placed haphazardly against the doors to obstruct them and prevent the exotic tribes from conducting a sudden attack. Xia Ji knocked open the vat of liquor sealed with soil. His fingers grabbed onto the cool side of the vat as he swirled the aromatic fine liquor and brought it to his lips. He lifted his head. He drank his fill. The alcohol warmed his insides. It was like a quiet fire burning within him. There was a grim expression on Deng Ju's face as he walked toward the tower. He had lost the sharpness and vigor from the days before and now looked especially old and frail. He was suffering from extreme fatigue and his body was covered with bloodstains. Some of the blood was his own, but most of it was from the enemies of his fellow soldiers. There was a sudden commotion from below the city once again. Deng Ju turned to look and saw another superior general from Guifang approaching from afar while riding on a gigantic wolf. He stood below the city and gave his ghost-headed saber a swing. He laughed uproariously while shouting out, "Are you Shang dynasty people that worthless? You can't defend your city and can't even win a one-to-one fight. Who else dares take up my challenge?" Ha ha ha. Deng Ju recognized this man. This was the Guifang superior general who had consecutively beheaded a total of 19 of his generals and swordsmen, Qi Kuei. It was unheard of for an army not to take up such a challenge from the enemy during battle, as this would result in the army's morale to plummet, but Deng Ju no longer cared for this. Was there even any morale left? Everyone was still standing their ground, not because of morale, but because of their basic instinct to endure, and all will end once they have endured this to the death. Deng Ju walked to a corner and saw the imperial prince in black armor drinking liquor. Emotions welled up within him. He had heard that this imperial prince had been imprisoned deep within the palace for 2 years. For those past 2 years, he had been studying Buddhist scriptures. There was indeed an air of serenity about him. Besides that, there was also a sense of heroic spirit within him. As Deng Ju was thinking about this, he had already walked to the side of Xia Ji. He stood at the same spot as Xia Ji and peered down below the city, suddenly saying quietly, "7th Imperial Prince, you have kept your promise to guard this place without leaving. I am truly impressed, but the capital can no longer stand. Your Highness, you should just leave." Xia Ji did not reply. All he did was hold on to the vat of liquor as he continued drinking ferociously. He finished the last drop and threw the vat aside casually, letting it break into pieces, before replying, "Okay." The next moment, Deng Ju watched disbelievingly as he jumped off the city wall in one leap and reached out with his right hand at the same time. The dark halberd, which was leaning against the wall, flew toward him. It sailed through the sky and fell into Xia Ji's hand. High above the skies, the imperial prince's dark hair fluttered wildly, the look in his eyes calm as a deep lake. Bam! He fell below the city heavily. The frozen soil of the earth cracked within inches as it bore the impact of the great power. It was like meteorites had struck the face of the earth. Up above on the city walls, Deng Ju's mind buzzed and went blank. Did the prince's "okay" mean doing this? Below the city, Chi Kuei was also shocked by the way Xia Ji had appeared and was taken aback by the bravado that came with it. He could not help asking, "Who? Who are you?" Xia Ji replied, "Xia Ji." Before he could even say the word Ji, a mighty thundering could be heard coming from the earth at each of his steps. As the rays of the 9 suns shone magnificently within him in an unending cycle, his figure had turned into a bright shadow made of light, combining with the circling dark energy of the demonic halberd as it stood out horizontally. Chi Kuei had killed 19 people in a row. His killing had scared his opponents so much that none would take up his challenge. This boosted his confidence tremendously. Even though he was shaken from the shock, he was not about to run off at this first meeting. Even though he was thinking curiously, who is this Xia Ji and why didn't he announce his identity earlier? When did the Shang dynasty have such a powerhouse? He reacted swiftly when he saw the other party rushing toward him. A vicious look flashed in his eyes as his thick legs covered in armor held on tight to the gigantic wolf he rode. He firmly gripped his ghost-headed saber and rode swiftly toward the new opponent. Rat-tat-tat. The two figures clashed at each other at a great speed, much like two lightning strikes crashing into each other, colliding heavily. Xia Ji did not use any particular technique. The dark halberd flashed with the rays of the 9 suns as the burning knife of the halberd came down with a booming sound. Chi Kuei roared as an aura of bloody rage appeared on the ghost-headed saber while it sliced through the air to meet its opponent. The halberd struck downward. The saber shattered. The halberd sliced through the space where Chi Kuei was. Xia Ji walked right through the superior general of Guifang and continued onward. His arms extended outward as his long halberd appeared with its full 18 feet of glory. The blazing light and dark energy intertwined like double dragons. Behind him, a line of blood appeared on the body of the unconquerable Guifang general who stood at the battlefront. The same line of blood extended to the back of the gigantic wolf. The scene paused for 2 seconds before the bloody line exploded into a thicker line and the two fell, sliced into perfect halves. Chi Kuei, his giant wolf, and the ghost-headed saber all fell onto the snowy ground. The look of shock could still be seen on the halved face of Chi Kuei. Upon the walls of the imperial capital, within the towers, numerous pairs of eyes were focused onto this imperial prince in the black armor. Many had yet to realize that the fight had ended. Deng Ju was still standing at the railings as his old, tired eyes stared below the city. The shock in his eyes had mixed emotions. His hands were unconsciously digging into the crevices of the brick wall. Xia Ji had walked further away. The Guifang army formation and base were 6 or 7 miles away where millions of refugees were kept captive. Numerous eyes stared at the figure of the imperial prince in black armor. It was silent, but very soon, roars erupted from Guifang as they raged against the imperial prince in black armor. Xia Ji walked between the two armies as he waved his dark halberd and pointed at the vast infantry and horses, saying lightly, "Next." A tall, stalwart, strong-looking man immediately appeared from Guifang's base camp. He was riding a giant wolf as he glanced coldly at the black-armored general who did not even have a mount, and sneered coldly. He held a giant axe as he suddenly sped up and rushed toward Xia Ji, going for the kill. The daunting momentum heightened about him as he sped toward Xia Ji on his giant wolf. An exploding shout came out of him when he arrived in front of the imperial prince in black armor. His imposing manner climaxed as his giant axe slashed through the windy snow. Good. The dark halberd in Xia Ji's right hand drilled into the ground. He did not even need to use the 100 form as his figure rushed forward. His right palm faced toward the front, and during this process, an image of the 18 levels of hell appeared on his hand. It was the form of the night parade of 100 ghosts. His hand expanded into a giant palm. The giant palm sailed through the air and went through the giant axe as it grabbed the strongman from Guifang in one move. The stalwart, vicious-looking strongman was shocked, but he could not react. He flew through the air as the giant hand struck him and crumpled hard onto the ground along with the giant wolf beneath him. Bam! They were like 2 mosquitoes filled with blood that had exploded from a slap of the hand. Fresh blood splattered all around them. The giant wolf and strongman had shriveled up. The fresh blood flowed into Xia Ji's black armor, and once again, it turned into a blood snake as it slithered around the dark halberd, like water absorbed by a sponge, as it was consumed. Too weak. Heaven and earth were silent as the wind and snow billowed around the men. Xia Ji did not hold onto the halberd. He opened up his arms and continued walking forward in the raging wind and snow, his cold voice saying, "Next." He had just said this when another bearded Guifang general, who was more than 2 meters tall, came forward. He frowned as he stared intently at Xia Ji for a moment. He was clearly trying to figure out Xia Ji's weakness. His eyes suddenly brightened as he gripped his sword and commanded his horse to rush forward for the kill. When he closed the distance to Xia Ji, the tall and foreboding general suddenly leaped from his horse. The huge sword in his hand gave a cold ring as it slashed downward menacingly in an unavoidable attack. Xia Ji looked at the vibrating blade. His expression did not change as his head moved to the side. 2 fingers on his right hand pressed casually to the side and a blazing light flashed from his fingers. There was a golden explosion amidst the electrical energy as it pushed against the saber that was rushing down to meet him. The saber was vibrated away by the swift action. Xia Ji took the opportunity to take a step forward as he grabbed the skull of the burly man. He gave a forceful twist and flung the man's head onto the ground casually. His movement was too quick and the mighty horse behind him was still galloping forward with the headless corpse on it. It continued running for 100 meters before the corpse fell to the ground. Xia Ji shifted his gaze to the Guifang army in the distance and shouted, "Are there any more?" It took a short while after his shout before another stalwart, vicious-looking general from Guifang came roaring from among the crowd. The Guifang soldiers opened up a path for him when he passed them. It was clear that this person was someone of considerable status in Guifang. He had no weapon on him, but came raging forward like an agitated brown bear as he made a mad dash toward Xia Ji. He gained furious momentum as he came, his muscles tightening around him like tree roots. His entire body tensed up like a strong bow being stretched to the limit. When he got within striking range, he raised his fist for a punch. The punch broke through the windy snow and boomed like a clap of thunder on a windy night, as if firecrackers had been set off. Xia Ji stood steadfast where he was and waved his right hand as he opened up his palms. 5 blazing suns rose from his 5 fingers while 4 suns remained within his palms, burning brightly with life. He clenched his fist and his 5 fingers held on viciously tight on the 9 suns. He did not even bother to evade the powerful attack and met the punch head-on. Fist against fist. He released his vigor path. The vitality of the 9 suns drove into the body of this warrior from Guifang, like a delicate leather hose connecting to a powerful water pump. All of a sudden, the brute's body expanded by a few times. His skin could no longer endure the expansion as he painfully held on for a few seconds before exploding in a bloody splash. His blood and flesh splattered, falling onto Xia Ji's face. However, it was burnt off by the inner vitality of the 9 suns and was quickly absorbed by the demonic armor as the flesh and blood fell upon it. The snow fell. The blood rose. Xia Ji stood between both army formations as his right hand grabbed a piece of burning flesh that had fallen onto the armor on his shoulder and he flung it away nonchalantly before waving his hand toward the distance. The Guifang warriors appeared one after the other on their wolves, each exploding to their deaths by Xia Ji's crude and cruel fashion. This massacre triggered thoughts of the last ancient generation's way of killing, which had the bloodiest and most savage methods. As the figures upon the walls of the imperial capital watched dumbfounded, they slowly regained their morale. It would be soon. The snowy ground in front of Xia Ji was completely colored red by blood. The scene looked like a butcher who was just done with cutting up meat and had dropped remnants of his trade all about. Many places even had flesh and blood piled up into little hills. Chi Kuei had slain 19, but now, Xia Ji's extreme kills had far exceeded this number. There were birds in the north that stayed hidden within the tall mountains. They had magnificent feathers and did not fly nor sing for 3 years, waiting for the right moment of wind and cloud to form. When the winds and clouds arrived, these birds would immediately fly straight up into the sky despite never flapping their wings in the air. They may appear mediocre, but it was only until the fat lady sings. The imperial city and Guifang watched the imperial prince standing in the middle of the dance floor. He had been studying Buddhist scriptures for more than 3 years but was now like a demon gone mad. For a moment, heaven and earth were silent. There was no longer anyone rushing out from the Guifang army's camp. The battlefield was like a meat-grinding machine that had now fallen into a dead silence. Xia Ji casually tossed a human head aside as he said with a calm expression while circulating his inner vitality, "Next." However, no one answered him again and there was no enemy appearing from the army. This Shang dynasty imperial prince waited for a long moment before his lips suddenly broke into a smile. He lifted his head and started laughing madly as the sound pierced the ears of both armies amidst the snowstorm. Chapter 20. Do you think you are really strong? The Shang dynasty's 7th imperial prince laughed uproariously like a mad demon as he stood alone between the opposing armies. This laughter became a sword that slashed the arrogance of the exotic tribe who were on a high after having sieged the wolf restraining pass, killed the heir apparent, obliterated an army of 100,000, and faced no obstructions upon making through the pass at the waist. The soldiers of Guifang lowered their heads, afraid to look the black-armored general in the eyes. Soon, the laughter stopped. Xia Ji said lightly, "So, that's all you are." His voice may sound calm, but it was filled with a vigor that could be heard clearly by both Guifang and the Shang dynasty. When he was done speaking, he turned away and pulled out the black demonic halberd stuck deep from the ground with his right hand. He propped it over his shoulder and headed back. The halberd had absorbed many of the Guifang warriors' blood and was now shining with a bright darkness. Xia Ji had just taken 2 steps when a grim, powerful call came from behind him. His expression remained unchanged, but his 5 fingers increased the grip on the dark halberd as he prepared to attack at any moment. In fact, he had already guessed that Guifang would not allow him to retreat so easily. The thud of a heavy object falling was heard. The surrounding earth trembled following the noise. However, it was clear that whatever object that had fallen was still quite a distance from him. Xia Ji paused in his steps and turned around. His gaze swept across and he saw that the heavy object that had fallen was a gigantic rock. It was around 4 meters in diameter and it had fallen about a mile away from where he had stood. However, no one came chasing after him. Xia Ji looked curiously toward the Guifang camp opposite him. However, no one needed to give him further explanation. He saw a frost giant moving another gigantic rock as it roared eerily, flinging the gigantic rock toward Xia Ji. The gigantic rock flew for about a mile as it soared past the previous boulder that had just fallen onto the ground, crashing down with an exploding boom. The power was quite formidable, but it was still quite a distance from where Xia Ji stood. Xia Ji looked at the gigantic rock and turned his gaze towards the Guifang soldiers opposite. The Guifang soldiers, who had previously kept their heads down, were now turning away and avoiding his gaze. Xia Ji suddenly understood what was happening. It was an attempt by the frost giants to ambush him, but the rocks flung out were not thrown far enough, which ended up in failure. He swept his gaze at these miniature mountains with mystical blue skin. These mountains stared at him with bronze bell-like eyes from afar. The giant who had just flung the gigantic rock was still roaring, as if trying to boast that, "I might not have hit you with the rock, but I have strength which a little insect like you could never come close to." Xia Ji's lips curved upward as he looked around him. He walked toward a larger boulder situated right next to where he was and patted it. He raised it by curling his arms around it and then held it up high with a single hand as he stared down Guifang and the frost giants who stood in the distance. He did not waste time with words as he combined the physical strength of the 18 levels of hell suppression energy and the inner vitality of the 9 sons of the Heart Sutra. There was a sudden burst of energy as he hurled the boulder straight in the opposite direction with his palm. Boom. The gigantic boulder left his hand as it exploded into a bright, burning, golden light, like a freshly launched missile leaving for its target, the tail displaying a light resembling a blazing fire. The gigantic rock was sent flying in an explosion in front of everyone's eyes as it drew an angular line across the sky and made a direct booming crash in the middle of the Guifang army camp. The collision landed a little more than 10 meters behind the miniature mountains with the mystical blue skin. The Guifang soldiers fell deathly silent. The frost giants had confused looks on their faces. Xia Ji pointed at them and shook his index finger at them. With that, he turned his gaze away from them, picked up his dark halberd, and turned to leave. The air was silent for a few seconds. The Guifang base camp suddenly erupted with enraged roars. The frost giants were roaring ferociously. Each of them started to pick up giant rocks as they threw them toward the black-armored shrimp's direction. However, even the best throw was landed at least 1 mile away from Xia Ji. Amidst a loud commotion caused by the unintelligible roars of the frost giants and the continuous booming crashes of the giant rocks, Xia Ji could no longer hold back as he laughed out loud. The frost giants behind him stopped throwing the rocks and a few ran out and stood in front of the army formation. They pointed at the figure of the black-armored shrimp from afar as they roared in chatters. One could only guess what they were roaring about. One thing was for certain, they looked pretty furious. Xia Ji had exerted himself quite a bit after the round of battling and killing. He put on an invincible facade during the battle challenges, but that did not mean he did not exert himself while attacking. The inner vitality of the Nine Suns may provide an unlimited supply of energy and allow him to recover his strength, but he still felt fatigued at the end of the day. He walked toward the black gates and raised his head. The city walls were filled with people. 3 rows of people from the outside and 3 rows of people from the inside. Every corner and every path of the city wall were filled with people as far as the eyes could see. Every general and soldier, every swordsman from the Brotherhood of Martial Arts who were helping with defending the city were at the wall. Even the commoners were leaning up against the pathways and doors at the city walls. The city gates opened. The Imperial Prince made a triumphant return. Everyone watched him quietly. The look in their eyes was initially filled with desperation and dullness, but the dullness had been ignited and there were now sparks of fire in their eyes. Someone had taken the lead in shouting, "Seventh Imperial Prince." With that, everyone followed suit and they started to cheer in agitation and excitement. Someone had called out, "Grand Marshal," but this voice was small and was quickly overtaken by calls of, "Seventh Imperial Prince." After which, every person unanimously screamed and shouted the words, "Seventh Imperial Prince." The voices resonated high and low as it reverberated throughout the imperial city. Xia Ji returned to his tower and removed his demonic armor. Xia Xiaosu touched the dagger in her pockets. She had earlier predicted the dagger to have pierced through her heart by now, but it turned out she was well and alive. This was because her big brother had won. Not only had he won, but he had also gained victory by crumbling the enemy in such a formidable manner in front of the eyes of both armies. Xia Ji grabbed a vat of fine liquor as he completely relaxed. Xia Xiaosu stood next to him. The siblings had too much to say to each other, for example, words like, "Why didn't you tell me before that you were so powerful?" or, "When did you suddenly become such a formidable force?" But the imperial princess said none of them. She breathed a relaxed sigh and stood next to her big brother, saying soulfully, "When you jumped from the city walls, my heart fell into the deepest abyss." Xia Ji laughed in reply, "What happened after that?" Xia Xiaosu said, "However, you didn't get hurt and even managed to kill Qi Kuei in one blow." My mind almost went blank. It was unbelievable. After that, you didn't fall back but continued to march forward in offense, walking right in between both armies. My heart almost stopped again then. I was screaming for you to return from the tower but you were too far away and the snowstorm was too loud. You couldn't hear me. Xia Ji smiled gently. But I'm back now. Xia Xiaosu replied, "Not only are you back, but you've killed 41 of Guifang's formidable generals, and even gave the frost giants a show of your superior strength. I can hardly believe that you are my big brother." Xia Ji asked, "Am I still your big brother?" Xia Xiaosu, "You will always be my big brother, but..." "But what?" Xia Xiaosu sighed. "Now that I have such a strong and powerful big brother, all my big brother has now is a little sister who is nothing but a burden." The siblings looked at each other for a while before Xia Ji said sincerely, "You're not a burden. I will never cry for others in suffering, but you will. If I found a wounded fox, I would grill it for food, but you wouldn't. If I was forced into a political marriage to Tujue, I would never accept it willingly, but you would. If I was in a situation that spelled my certain death, I would never remain behind, much less bring along a dagger with me to the top of the city walls and wait in silence, but you would. You would rather die alongside me than live alone. Xiaosu, you have a quality within you that I do not possess. Many might think that is a weakness, but I don't think so. That is why, you should never belittle yourself." Xia Xiaosu was silent for a while. She later lowered her head and said quietly, "I understand, big brother. However, can we really succeed?" Her gaze turned toward the window in the tower as she stared outside. White snow, red blood, icy skies and snowy grounds. Dark clouds hung above the city. Not to mention those tall, foreboding figures among the exotic tribes. As army after army of troops marched in from afar to combine forces with the Guifang camp, it greatly expanded the camp's power. There were still a few hundred little troops setting up individual camps nearby the Guifang camp. They were nomadic bandits and rogue horsemen from beyond the Great Wall. Some were from the martial arts world from beyond the Great Wall who were looking to sneak into the midst and take advantage of the upcoming chaos. Compared to the backup coming in for the enemy, nothing was happening for the Shang dynasty. It seemed like anyone smart was still aware that the heir apparent and his army of 100,000 was obliterated in battle and the imperial emperor had left the imperial capital. Would it help for anyone to send backup? Moreover, these reinforcements would be made up of their own soldiers. Every death was a loss. Who would be willing to offer themselves? In addition to that, even if the exotic tribes were successfully defeated, they were well versed at war during deep winter. If they could not take down the imperial capital, they would turn their sights to another city. What if the city under attack turned out to be their own? It would make more sense to feed the rich and prosperous Shang dynasty imperial to the exotic tribes. The invaders would be satisfied with raping and plundering the imperial capital. Once they were fulfilled, they would not plunder and kill those nearby. After a month, these exotic tribes would notice spring arriving and would leave on their own accord. When that time came, they could conjure up a huge army and go after them alongside the imperial emperor. When evening arrived, the snowstorm stopped. A few rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, a rare sight. It was not long before cries of shock could be heard from the city walls. Xia Xiaosu's ears picked it up and she ran toward Xia Ji. Big brother, a few taller and bigger giants are coming over from the other side. Xia Ji pointed outside the window. I can see them. There are 3 of them. They were far off. At Guifang's army camp. Those dozens of frost giants had originally stood out from the crowd, but these 3 new giants were taller than the rest with an average height of 10 meters. The other frost giants were like dwarves next to these 3. Not long after, one of the 3 giants walked directly toward the imperial city. A blue metallic accessory with a beetle hung around his neck. There was a huge rock in his hand. It was the rock Xia Ji had thrown at the Guifang camp. The giant moved slowly toward the city with a foreboding air. There was a commotion on the city walls of the imperial city. Who had ever seen a giant that was 10 meters tall? This monster lived in the icy snow world. Neither sword nor spear could penetrate him and his strength was formidable. Who could ever fight it? Even if he stood there without moving and allowed the soldiers to slash him, they might not necessarily even put a scratch on it. What is he planning to do? Why is the monster coming over on his own? Be on high alert. Deng Ju had been resting, and the person on defense duty at the top of the wall at the moment was the eldest son of the Deng family, Deng Gongjiu. He was young and in peak form. He had the green dragon sword in his hand, striking a rather stalwart figure. When he spotted the giant approaching, the first thing he did was give the order to set up the army's strong shot crossbows. He even got them to put out a complex machine that looked like a series of steps. This machine was able to fit 3 strong shot crossbows to achieve an effective, continuous shots. Deng Gongjiu considered for the crossbow arrows to be shot in a concentrated area. This way, when the first arrow pierced through the frost giant's icy snow armor, the subsequent shots would be able to wound the giant. However, this plan was not able to be put into action because the 10-meter-tall frost giant stopped suddenly at a distance 3 miles away from the imperial city. He looked toward the direction of the tower and suddenly lifted the huge rock forcefully as he pushed it up with all his strength. With that, he threw it out with ferocity. The huge rock flew toward the city wall's tower like a meteorite. Xia Ji had been standing outside the tower earlier on. He reached out with his right hand and performed the night parade of 100 ghosts form from the 18 levels of hell suppression energy. His expanding palms reached toward the meteorite. The meteorite stopped abruptly as a mighty palm blocked it. The entire city wall trembled furiously from the impact. Xia Ji's palm held onto the giant rock as his right hand hooked onto it and grabbed it tightly. His hand was pushed back slightly and later, he sent the rock flying back out by using an exploding force that combined physical and inner strength. Bam! The huge rock shot back with an even greater force, turning into a meteorite flying in the opposite direction. The 10-meter-tall frost giant did not look deterred as he held up his hand to catch it. Both of the giant's hands blocked the huge rock, but the inner vigor within the rock exploded a second time. The frost giant felt a strange power assaulting him as his blood and vitality started flowing counterclockwise. His bones cracked noisily and his eyes popped from his sockets. His body went out of control as he flew through the air, soaring away along with the huge rock. The giant threw up a mouthful of mythical blue bloody mist while flying through the air and ended up falling back onto the ground far away as he rolled about disheveled for quite a while before finally lying flat on his stomach. No one knew if he was dead or alive. Chapter 21. Open the city gates. The steward sighed softly as he witnessed the scene. He knew deep down that the 7th Imperial Prince had not used his full strength when fighting against him. He glanced toward the direction of the tower with mixed emotions. For the first time, a glimmer of belief that the imperial capital could really be defended crossed his mind. The soldiers were starting to cheer, most of them were shouting, "The mighty 7th Imperial Prince! The invincible 7th Imperial Prince!" There were also many scattered voices within the crowd exclaiming, "The 7th Imperial Prince has studied Buddhist scriptures diligently and is now blessed by the Lord Buddha and given unlimited powers. The imperial capital is blessed by Buddha, it will definitely be protected." There were even people hidden within the crowd saying, the imperial emperor was wise enough to recognize the 7th Imperial Prince's capabilities, which was why the prince was picked to guard and protect the city. The emperor was giving the imperial prince an opportunity to shine. Xia Ji sat by the sidelines of the clutter of voices as he watched the arrival of dusk with the imperial princess beside him. The night sky was falling. The sun had set into the horizon of white snow and the luminous moon's bright brilliance shone onto the vast earth of where they resided. The weather was no longer icy and snowy, which meant that the frost giants had lost a layer of their tough armor, thus diminishing the power of their assault into the enemy's ranks. However, the rock-throwing showdown during the daytime had given them new thoughts for battle. Dozens of frost giants, along with the catapults claimed by Guifang during the battle, headed toward the front lines. And then, the frost giants stood more than a mile away from the city walls while the soldiers from Guifang forced the refugees into supplying huge rocks continuously. Any refugee attempting to escape would be executed on the spot. When the rocks had been collected into little mounds, the onslaught began. The giants made their throws while the catapults shot projectiles continuously. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The huge rocks transformed into meteors as they sailed through the wind currents across the dark skies. The loud whooshing from afar hurtled toward the city under the moonlight. Some rocks crashed into the city walls. Some demolished crevices. Some crushed patrolling soldiers to death. Some even sailed past the top of the wall and landed inside the city. Boom, 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 boom. The thundering did not stop. The imperial city started to shake at its core. The battlefield, like a meat-grinding machine, had manufactured a new form of war. Deng Ju quickly gathered his army, leaving 200 soldiers at the top of the city wall while the rest retreated from there and headed down the wall. Only the protection of the high walls could help reduce the casualties in battle. The capital was now in complete chaos. Guifang and the frost giants continued hurling massive rocks from afar. If they could destroy the city walls or one of the city gates, it would allow the vast army of the exotic tribes to charge into the imperial city and launch an all-out attack. Boom. Beneath the moon's gleam, the huge rocks rained endlessly from the sky. Houses were crushed and collapsed while the streets were punctured with holes and dents. Nearly every Shang dynasty soldier in charge of guarding the city was hiding behind the city walls. They stood together in groups and stuck close to each other in formation. All they could do was wait to rush out and meet the Guifang army in close-quarter combat once the city wall fell. Deng Ju could no longer shout out orders from the army's base camp. As for Xia Ji and the imperial princess, the steward, eunuch Mei, and the others, they had retreated from the tower to somewhere below the walls. Discussions were conducted hastily at every corner. A lieutenant suddenly proclaimed, "General Deng, we cannot allow the frost giants to continue their attack. Mountains and forests lie outside the west gates and there's an unlimited supply of rocks for the enemy. Guifang is fully equipped with limitless projectiles for catapulting. The city walls will definitely fall at this rate." Deng Ju nodded, indicating that he was well aware of this. More voices were breaking into discussion. The soldiers discussed it with one another without reservation. A slightly eccentric voice suddenly made its way out from the crowd, "The 7th Imperial Prince is such a formidable force. He managed to kill 41 Guifang warriors at the front lines and could even give the frost giants a run for their money. If His Highness went into battle, he would surely be able to destroy all the catapults and force all the frost giants into retreat, saving the entire imperial capital from grave danger." Many agreeing voices were soon added in. The people of the imperial city asked of His Highness to go into battle. Another voice traveled down from somewhere else. The Almighty Imperial Prince. Your Highness, please save the people of the Imperial City. More and more people started echoing the suggestion once it was voiced. The voices talked over each other. Deng Ju's face darkened. Naturally, he had noticed the unusual sentiment behind those words. He lifted his head to search for the person who first shouted it, but whoever had made the initial suggestion was now keeping silent. All he could hear was scattered voices ringing throughout the area. Worse still, the other soldiers, and even the swordsmen who had stayed behind and the commoners, were all chipping in their support for this idea. They had started to chime in softly in agreement. That was because they had witnessed the power of the 7th Imperial Prince. They truly believed the 7th Imperial Prince was blessed by the Lord Buddha. They believed that the wise Imperial Emperor had planned it all, that he left the 7th Imperial Prince to guard the city for a good reason. Such were their thoughts. The more Deng Ju listened, the angrier he got. He was about to stand up and lecture them when the 7th Imperial Prince's calm voice said into his ear, "Sit down." The old general was taken aback, but he obeyed and sat down. Xia Jie stood up amidst the shouting of the people and replied loudly by circulating his inner energy and shouting a simple reply, "Okay." With that, he headed off to stand at a high point and pointed at the soldiers and lieutenant who had rowdily shouted the requests. There were a total of 44 of them. Some attempted to hide, but were still spotted and identified. Xia Ji asked directly, "Would all of you be willing to head out to battle with me?" The lieutenant and the soldiers dodged his gaze and someone muttered, "If we were to leave the city, all that awaits us is death." "Please, 7th Imperial Prince, please head out to battle. The Almighty Imperial Prince, please save all the people in the city. If your Highness enters the battle, you will be sure to return victorious." Xia Ji was not surprised by these words. The only feeling he felt was lament. The city was about to fall, and yet, there were still those who would create inner conflict by forcing the prince to his death. At the same time, they were downplaying his contribution and reverence as much as possible. This was getting interesting. This world would always be filled with people who were not able to see beyond their noses, and those who stayed behind the scenes while puppeteering such short-sighted people. Were they trying to ambush him by using the people of the city? He would simply look stupid if he heeded those words and took action based on them. However, if he killed these people, it would only make him look like an incompetent madman. The real mastermind behind this was not the people calling out loudly right in front of him. If that was the case, Xia Ji said in a very gentle manner, "It's fine. It's okay if you aren't willing to go." Xia Ji turned back and immediately said to Deng Ju, "Execute them all and mince them into meat. Remember to give me a list of their names, including the people behind them." Deng Ju. The old general may be a rough and frank man, but he was not stupid. All it took was a quick thought for him to understand what was at stake. He had to be the one to carry this burden. With that, he barked angrily, "These men are undermining the morale in the army. Detain them and sentence them according to military law. Everyone. Deng Ju, arrest them." All of a sudden, 100 disciplinary soldiers from the army appeared and caught hold of all 44 offenders, dragging them away. Those 44 people wanted to shout out, but were quickly restrained by the soldiers around them who forced pieces of soft cloth into their mouths and tied all their limbs together, dragging them toward an empty wasteland. Deng Ju glanced at Xia Ji. The 7th Imperial Prince was watching intently from a distance as if worrying about the battle. Deng Ju made the hard decision. Creating chaos in such a situation is punishable by death. There will be no mercy, mince them into meat. Everyone. The 44 people were scared out of their minds. Many soldiers began to gasp, "They're going to die in the army without even having the opportunity to die in battle." Deng Ju was explicit when conducting the execution. He arrested another few dozens of soldiers and followed the 7th Imperial Prince's instructions of grinding the offenders into a bloody pulp. It was not long before more than 100 people were bathing in their blood, looking like a pool of red under the moonlight. After that, no one dared say another word. Xia Ji's attention suddenly returned to the situation as he finally voiced out, "General Deng, you've taken things too far." Deng Ju placed his fists together with respect. "You are right, Marshal. I have acted rashly." Xia Ji said, "Accept punishment on your own accord after the battle." Deng Ju was taken aback. After the battle? Would there still be anything around after the battle? Although the crux of the battle was now in the hands of this young imperial prince. He was ruthless, powerful, mysterious, and had high tolerance and patience. This imperial prince was a formidable hero of the generation, and it seemed like his fate was now tied to the imperial prince. He replied loudly, "Yes." With that, this matter was considered settled. The city fell into immediate silence. All that could be heard was the thundering booms from outside. By the looks of the situation, they had no choice but to head out of the city. Otherwise, the imperial city would be laid under siege tonight. Deng Zhu did not bother to ask who was willing to go into battle. He immediately ordered, 10,000 soldiers from Red Leopard Camp, fall in. 10,000 soldiers immediately stood up. These 10,000 soldiers had never taken part in guarding the city nor had ever been in battle. This was a team of elites Deng Zhu had planned to use at the last, critical moment. He glanced at each face that was filled with the determination to go into battle as he shouted out, "Very good. All of you, do you have the guts to follow me into battle and destroy the enemy? We are willing to head out to battle with General Deng." The morale at Red Leopard Camp was high. Deng Zhu looked at Xia Ji and said grimly, "Your Highness, I will leave the imperial city in your hands." Xia Ji raised his hand and said lightly, "I will go. You protect the city." Deng Zhu was stunned, but the voice of the imperial prince was filled with certainty. Xia Ji stood up after saying the words and walked out under the moonlight. The beast-themed chain armor, the 18-foot-long great darkness halberd, the black hair dancing about like a dancing demon, the expression that was calm like water and peaceful like the Buddha. He called out loud, "Open the city gates." Deng Zhu followed with a roar. The 7th Imperial Prince is the Grand Marshal of the world in charge of guarding the imperial city. He is a brave warrior and invincible at the front lines. What should that have anything to do with Buddha? What does it have to do with anyone else? All of you, listen to the order. I, too, will obey. He roared out the words with total conviction. Tens of thousands of the remaining army and the assisting swordsmen around, as well as the young men, were completely silent. After that, a wave of voices erupted, yes. Wave after wave of affirmation could be heard. Xia Ji walked to the very front as he held up his hand and waved. He shouted, "Those who are willing to die for your country tonight, follow me out to battle." With that, he shouldered the dark halberd without even bothering to mount a horse, and strode out in wide steps with his head held high, walking past the city gates as the doors opened slowly. He walked toward the army of the exotic tribes outside the city. Even though 10 million people awaited beyond, the way to go was only forward. 10,000 troops from the Red Leopard Camp followed in formation behind. The scene, right there and then, moved Deng Zhu as he witnessed it. The old general suddenly shouted, "Your Highness, if you return, the Deng family will be at your beck and call." With that, the old general turned to look at a stalwart general standing not far off and said loudly, "There is no better time to give your life for your country. Unfilial son, what are you still doing here and not following His Highness out to battle?" "Yes, father." Deng Zhigong had his eyes fixed on the figure who was both demonic and divine. The blood within him had long been boiling in excitement. He bucked his horse forward with his legs and followed behind with the green dragon sword in hand. Deng Zhu roared again, "Anyone else?" His roar was hoarse and filled with a solemn stirring, like someone who was singing without inhibitions. Hundreds of elite swordsmen from renowned martial arts families followed him out of the city as well. Some soldiers later rushed out behind them too. One after the other, more and more soldiers followed suit in small groups. There were even young commoners who followed suit. The moonlight filled up the path. With the city gates wide open, this imperial city that was about to be sacrificed finally made the decision to follow in the footsteps of the man who was destined to make his way all over the world, and it was slowly revealing its sharp fangs. Chapter 22. It could be that the gods are on my side tonight. The battle drums sounded under the bright moon and horns blared. Up in the sky, the meteors fell like a wild storm. The Red Leopard Camp formed a tidy formation as they followed closely behind the strongest imperial prince. Before today, they knew very little of the 7th Imperial Prince. The only impression they had of him was that he was imprisoned deep within the palace and that he enjoyed studying Buddhist scriptures. Today, their impression of him had completely changed. Whoosh! A meteor flew through the air, cutting through the brutal winds. Its trajectory looked like it was headed toward them, and a flash of regret and frightened panic appeared in the eyes of the soldiers from the Red Leopard camp, but the mighty Imperial Prince suddenly lifted his left arm. The meteor came crashing down. His 5 fingers spread open. It did not matter how fast or strong the meteor was, when faced with the 5-finger mountain blocking its way, there was no way for it to budge even an inch forward. Xia Ji flipped his palm over and lifted the huge rock. There was a look of excited fire burning in the eyes of the soldiers behind him. Who would not desire victory in battle? Who would not desire to follow such a great general into battle? Xia Ji stopped in his steps and suddenly called out loud, "Leave the city gates open." Everyone was stunned when he said the words. Even Deng Ju, who remained in the city, was stunned, but he quickly understood what was going on. The old general mumbled, "This is crazy, this is simply crazy." Despite his words, a blazing fire suddenly burned with adrenaline within him. He immediately roared, "Heed the marshal's orders. Leave the city gates open." The gates were left wide open. The army that marched out was the only thing standing between the imperial city and the exotic tribes. There was no longer any need for the exotic tribes to continue with catapulting. There was no need to continue standing guard at the imperial city. There was no longer any way for them to retreat. The only thing left to do was for both armies to clash. Everything will be decided by the outcome of this final battle. Xia Ji lifted his head to gaze at the moon above, and next toward the unending figures of the enemy. Suddenly, he said gently, "The moon is shining bright in the sky tonight. Now that the city gates are open, we shouldn't let this fine night and the pleasant surroundings go to waste. Please, everyone, do come into the city now." When his voice resonated across the battleground, a sudden silence spread among the exotic tribes on the opposite side. They had never faced such a situation before. The biggest obstacle when sieging a city was the unbreakable city gates. Every fight and skirmish would always revolve around the city gates. However, this time, the opposition had actually opened the city gates without inhibition. What did this mean? "Are you afraid?" Xia Ji questioned them calmly. He pulled along the 18-foot dark halberd in his right hand while gripping the boulder with his left as he moved a few steps forward. He paused momentarily before roaring, "If you don't dare, then go the hell back where you came from." With that, he thrust out his left hand and the huge rock propelled with incredible force outward. It was suddenly sailing through the air as it flew over a huge distance, crash landing accurately on a catapult and obliterating it. Even the Guifang soldiers standing next to the catapult were crushed. The other Guifang soldiers in close proximity quickly retreated. Xia Ji laughed as he took a step forward. He seemed to have forgotten that he had soldiers with him. Forgotten that there were tens of millions of people opposing him. He and the obstacle in front of him were the only things left under heaven and earth. It did not look like he was going to kill the enemy or take down the enemy, it felt like he was simply going forward to cut off all ties with the obstacle that was disturbing his mind. The imposing atmosphere surrounding him became thicker. His mind filled with Buddhist Zen as he connected with heaven and earth. When flowers bloom and one smiled, he would be connected with heaven and earth. If flowers bloomed because one smiled, it was heaven and earth connecting with him. This was the true meaning behind Tathagata's meditation. At that moment, the moonlight between heaven and earth and the blowing wind were influenced by his state of mind as they followed his footsteps and gradually turned into a golden heavenly dragon. He was the dragon's head. The soldiers and swordsmen following him were the dragon's body and the dragon's scales. This strange and mythical scene astonished the soldiers, who were rooted in reality. It brought upon an ascending sense of morale. They could not understand how the pale moonlight could transform into a golden heavenly dragon, but regardless, they were now part of the dragon itself. The gods are on our side. That was the thought in every soldier's mind. The vast desire for Buddhist meditation, the spiritual conduct of connecting with heaven and earth, Xia Ji's personal spirits, and the will to battle, had influenced every soldier there. The gods are on our side, what is there to fear? The last hidden strain of fear and decadence within the hearts of every soldier had been wiped clean by this grand and magnificent spirit. The gods are on our side, what is there to fear, and what possibility is there for failure? Although the journey was just one short mile, the soldiers and swordsmen who marched out of the city had experienced cleansing of their mental state of mind, enhancing morale tremendously in one swoop. As an individual situated in this vast battlefield, each soldier felt themselves to be insignificant. On the battlefield, the swordsmen who displayed vigorous and proficient martial arts skills were considered to be like a drop of water in a gigantic wave. They followed the figure of the imperial prince. A united will is like a fortress, and because of that, they would be blessed by the gods and they would become the heavenly dragon. The imperial prince's step became increasingly fast as he started to run. His followers pulled out their sabers, swords, and spears as they fell into formation, like aggressive wolves poised to strike. The ferocious soldiers reflected chilling glows under the moonlight, shimmering with life like the scales of a heavenly dragon. The Guifang warriors, frost giants, and every rogue bandit and exotic tribes opposite from them had just only reacted to what was happening. After a series of commotions, they came plundering from west to east like a huge tidal wave. The enemy's gates were open and there was no longer any need to attack the city. All they needed was to destroy this army and the prosperous riches of Shang dynasty's imperial capital would lay open for their taking. Such prosperity included delicately exquisite beauties, the most supreme delicacies, mountains of gold, silver, and jewels, and a heaven on earth that allowed them to kill to their heart's content. They could viciously humiliate and belittle Shang dynasty's stubborn vigor. There were also the legendary 3,000 bevies of beauties hidden deep within the imperial palace of the vast central plain. Destroy this army and enter the imperial city. It would be equivalent to entering heaven. Attack! Attack! The exotic tribes were mad with excitement. Heaven's gate was open. If they did not enter it now, when would there be a better time? The tides came from the east, the tides came from the west. The clash of these gigantic rolling waves would only end with one side being swallowed by the other. One's heaven was another's hell. Right there and then, the enemy had to die, or it will spell the death of oneself. The speed escalated from both sides and they finally clashed viciously in the middle of the land. They were like two gigantic, primitive beasts with a bloodthirsty grudge for one another. The soldiers met each other at close quarters and the bloodiest battle erupted between them. While chaos reigned among both armies, Xia Ji made a beeline toward the place where the frost giants had set up camp. The group of giants was now quite familiar with this shorty in black armor. When enemies collide, it would only ignite anger. The giants surrounded him, each of them with a spiked club in their hand. They wanted to teach this black-armored shorty a lesson. On the other side, the Shang dynasty soldiers and swordsmen were filled with high morale as they engaged in a bloody battle with the vicious exotic tribes. The fight had suddenly turned quite systematic. Soldier against soldier. General against general. The swordsmen from the martial arts world went against the exotic tribes and bandits. Xia Ji confronted the frost giants. The imperial prince with the beast-themed chain armor waved his dark halberd around, continuously beating away the spiked clubs that came down heavily upon him. The attacking style of the dozens of frost giants was quite simple and had no signs of technique. All they knew was to surround this person, who was nothing but a black-armored shorty in their eyes, and hit down on him forcefully with the weapon in their hands in a direct and brutal, but coarse attack. They may be giants and had huge skulls, but they possessed small brains. The shorties they had encountered in the past would either be beaten into mincemeat with one strike of their spike clubs, or evaded their attack like an agile monkey and make their escape. There had been no shorty who had been able to take on their attack. Right now, however, this black-armored shorty not only had the strength to take on their attacks, but was fully capable of going up against the strength of dozens of them. This had befuddled the frost giants. Not only were they confused, but their pride had taken a huge hit as well, which contributed to their increasing rage. Boom, 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 boom. The ground trembled along with the sound of footsteps. The frost giants opened up a path among themselves on the west side. At the end of the path was a 10-foot frost giant who had a mystic blue snake accessory hung around his neck. He was running forward from afar with an exaggeratingly huge and heavy axe in his hand. When he was approaching, the giant axe was suddenly lifted up and under the moonlight, a chilling glow reflected in a violent frenzy from it. He rammed the axe, as if drilling into a construction site, towards Xia Ji, who had just thrust his halberd forward. The force from the collision created a powerful storm, attracting the attention of the soldiers and warriors who were clashing at each other. They could not help pausing at this moment as they turned to look in the direction of the storm. Even though the giant axe was not targeted at them, it still evoked a sense of shock within them. One powerful stroke was enough to outdo 10,000 techniques. Even the top powerhouse in the martial arts world could only choose to evade the attack when faced with such brute force. Even some of the superior masters of unorthodox physical training would not be able to fend off this attack. Even if one cultivated the golden bell cover and iron cloth from the principle of Buddhist law to the highest level, the iron cloth would be destroyed from this one attack. There might be a chance of defending oneself from such an attack if impenetrable iron body was cultivated to peak level, but it was only a chance and not a guarantee. Legend has it that the principle of demonic law had a divine skill called the unshakable 3000 Jia Mountains. It was the highest form of defensive skill, but even when facing such an attack, one would still encounter hundreds of levels of shattering that would shake one's core, surely. Right then, the 7th Imperial Prince was in grave danger. He had just circulated his vigor to thrust his halberd and was now at the point when his energy had been depleted but not yet revitalized. How was he going to face this attack? If he chose to evade the attack, how would he do so? Chapter 23. Turning the world upside down with one hand. Xia Ji did not dodge. Amidst the extreme movement, he had suddenly quietened. Everything around him fell silent. His left hand pulled out a few shadows, freeze-framed in a certain posture, and suddenly he formed a gesture of respect. Following this action, black flammules poured out from tens of thousands of pores. A massive surface, 3 meters tall, emerged out of nowhere and a Buddha's form appeared instantly. There was a furious expression on the figure while raging flames burnt behind it. The huge, dark Buddha had its head held high while its eyes were Xia Ji's eyes. He gazed coldly toward the violent light emanating from the hostile axe. The giant axe fell with a resonating crash onto the Aryakulanatha's Buddhist form. The axe went through it for half a meter, causing the Buddha to shift slightly, but it was never more than just a slight movement. Right at that moment, the 10-meter-tall frost giant wielding the axe was completely stunned. Even the frost giant shorties around him, who were around 5 to 6 meters tall, had looks of confusion scribbled on their faces. As far as they could recall, every time their warrior swung his axe, it did not matter who the other party was, that opponent would always be chopped in half. Why was this black-armored shorty so resilient? The frost giant with the mystic blue snake accessory tried to lift his axe again but found that it was being held down by a strong force. The huge, black Buddha gripped onto the back of the axe with its left hand while the black-armored shorty looked at the frost giant with a condescending smile on his lips. The giant tried fervently to raise his arm, but the giant axe remained unmoving, as if suppressed by a range of mountains. Xia Ji's left hand pressed onto the giant axe while he seized the opportunity to gain the upper hand. He transformed into a black light. The dark halberd in his right hand glowed with a furiously bright and burning light that crept from the handles, to the double crescents, to the tip of the blades. 9 burning suns rose to the very top from his inner vitality of the 9 suns. Even though he knew the best way to utilize the 100 form, he chose the bluntest and most violent method. It was impolite not to reciprocate, and even though he had desecrated etiquette, he insisted on returning the favor to the other party. The imperial prince of the Shang dynasty tightly gripped the handle of his 18-foot dark halberd. He used the same crashing force and swung up a blinding, blazing, burning sun in brilliant light and filled it with an orb of sunlight before hurling it toward the 10-meter frost giant. The giant barely had time to lift his axe to block the attack. The violent attack was dished out at close range. The hell suppression plus the 9 suns, physical strength plus powerful inner strength, caused the axe handle to explode upon contact. The momentum did not cease as it continued to tear through the body of the 10-meter giant, cutting a deep wound of more than half a meter on his body. However, the skin of the giant was durable and his muscles were dense. The strength of his bones was several times that of a normal human being. As the dark halberd tore apart his flesh, a mystic color of blue blood came pouring out from the giant's body. The pressure of the flowing blood pressed against the blades of the halberd. The blood was extremely frosty, like icy water melting profusely from a 1,000-year-old iceberg. It extinguished the fiery burn of the inner vitality of the 9 suns. This was the unique blood that belonged only to the frost giants. If these 5 to 6 meter tall giants could weather a rain of arrows without harm, then this 10-meter tall giant would reign invincible even if he stood against an army of 100,000. It was the presence of such a giant at the front lines that made it possible for the heir apparent's army of 100,000 to be completely obliterated. However, Xia Ji did not use his full power. He had other thoughts in mind. Thoughts were still thoughts, and the killing had to continue. His halberd came down hard and slashed through the half-meter of the wound he had induced previously onto the 10-meter frost giant, cracking one of his ribs. He borrowed the momentum from the attack's rebound. Once again, he leaped a few meters upward as he held the great darkness halberd up high above him. The halberd's tip fused with the 9 suns and shone across the land bathed in moonlight. It brought along a glittering golden light and a raging storm of a whirlwind as it crashed down with inhuman force once again. The frost giant was stunned. The wound had caused him intolerable pain throughout his body and had induced him into a vicious rage. He grabbed his giant axe, which was left with only half a handle, and swung out a chilling glow as he faced the attack straight on. The axe was cut. Both of the 10-meter giant's hands bled a mystic blue as blood dripped from between his thumb and index finger. The moment his blood flowed, it transformed into freezing ice that covered the wound. The giant lifted his head and saw that the black-armored shorty was not affected in any way. Instead, the shorty had once again borrowed the momentum from the attack and soared into the air as he swung the dark halberd. The blade tip of the halberd was as bright as the brilliant, blazing sun and blinded the frost giant, who was unable to look directly at it. Then, the giant made a decision he had never considered before in his life. He tumbled over to hide from the attack. Xiajia came crashing down, with the dark halberd in tow. The ground cracked from the powerful force that came down at it. Tons of ice, snow, and frosted soil and rocks were sprayed into the air from the solid earth. The ground had been shattered as it collapsed into a deep chasm. The other 5 to 6 meter frost giants were left dumbfounded. Their morale started to plummet and they even seemed to have lost the will to continue battling. Their minds were pretty clear about making a decision. They actually dragged their spiked clubs and made a run for where they came from. No more fighting. They could not win. What was the point of continuing the fight? However, heavy steps sounded from somewhere nearby. 2 other frost giants who were 10 meters tall came rushing over. One of them had a mystic blue beetle on him while the other carried a mystic blue eyeball. The former had 2 gigantic spiked clubs while the latter had a gigantic mace covered with spikes. Whoosh! A spiked club was thrown out from afar. The first frost giant who was attempting to escape quickly caught the weapon and turned around once again as he followed the other 2 forward in attack. The strongest among the 3 frost giants was like a trotting horse as he circled Xia Ji and engaged in combat. This battle formation literally shook the earth and mountains. The tremors surrounding the battlefield had stopped the skirmish between the human soldiers and warriors from both sides. It was clear that the battle on this side would be the deciding fight of the entire war. If the 7th imperial prince of the Shang dynasty won, it would be a victory for the Shang dynasty. If the 3 frost giants won, it would be Guifang's victory. These fighting forces were too powerful. As the vanguards of the battle, they were capable of tearing everything apart. Just as the frost giants had obliterated the heir apparent and his army of 1,000 at the front lines and sieged the wolf restraining pass, if this imperial prince was able to defeat the 3 frost giants, he could also lead the remaining Shang dynasty soldiers to finish off those hoarding here from Guifang. Under the moonlight, the people in the imperial city watched from afar. The demonic yet divine dark figure was fighting against 3 frost giants who were all 10 meters tall. The battle of these 4 had long surpassed the scope of what was considered normal fighting and killing on the battlefield. The booming crashes sounded like raging thunder while the ground was filled with a dull drumming. 1 against 3. No, it was 3 against 1. Clearly, it was the 3 frost giants going up against the Shang dynasty's imperial prince. Eunuch Mei pushed the steward toward the broken city wall. They were both silent. There was an overwhelming, bright, and agitated look dancing in Eunuch Mei's eyes while a grim look flashed in the steward's eyes. Your Highness, I'm afraid I won't be able to complete the task you have given me. The 7th imperial prince has ruined your plans with his prowess, and is about to turn the tables on this destined sacrificial event. I've witnessed this with my own eyes. The 7th imperial prince is the true royal among the people. Why is he the son of imperial concubine Yu? Why is that? It's such a pity. Your Highness. Eunuch Mei said aloud, Steward, if His Highness wins, let's serve him alongside one another. Our limbs may be broken, but the art of marionette is aplenty in the world. Our broken limbs can be refitted into puppets, and even though, from today onward, our inner vitality can only complete microscopic circulation, but puppets can still serve with their unexpected killing skills. The steward sighed and said, Eunuch Mei, what do you think the 7th imperial prince wants? Eunuch Mei replied, I have always been a mere servant and have never understood the thoughts of my master. The steward smiled. I need you to take me somewhere. Eunuch Mei said, your bet with the 7th Imperial Prince hasn't ended yet. The steward took another look at the frightening, bloody battlefield as he flashed a smile. What's more to see? Let's go. I'm not escaping. There's no way to escape at all. I just need to get something. Moonlight. Like frost. The battlefield. The spiked clubs of 2 frost giants had been shattered. Their bodies had deep slash wounds with mystic blue blood staining everywhere. The blood might be able to instantly freeze and cover the wound, but the giants had to endure the searing pain as well. These 2 giants had lost the courage to continue fighting. In addition to that, they had lost their weapons and could only fall back and watch the top warrior of the frost giants exchange blows with that black armored monster. Of course. Despite their limited mental capacity, they had clearly made out the distinguished difference between this black armored monster and the other shorties. They were completely different living beings. That was why they were willing to bestow the respect of calling him the strongest shorty of them all. No, it should be black armored monster. They craned their necks, eager to see if their top warrior was able to beat this black armored monster and send him flying through the air. Their warrior now had his weapon in hand as he fought with the black armored monster in a more traditional form. They took turns attacking each other, one blow at a time. The one who could not take the attack would be crushed. As the top warrior among the frost giants, Luo Luo was worthy of his moniker. However, even he was having a tough time in the fight right now. The spiked mace. In his hand was not a common weapon and could not be shattered by the dark halberd, but it was because of his weapon being unable to be broken that he had been thrown into a position of suffering. Every time he exchanged blows with his enemy, the other party would come down at him with 2 powerful hits. Once the first attack started to subside, the second force would crash down at the precise moment of the quiet subsiding attack, pressuring him so much it made his blood boil. His internal organs might be much stronger than a human, but the repeated attacks still gave him tremendous pain. Finally, Luo Luo lifted his head and spat out a huge amount of mystic blue bloody mist. He made the decision to stop fighting and dragged his spiked mace behind him as he turned to escape. The other frost giants followed suit when they saw their top warrior fleeing the battlefield. Xia Ji fell to the ground and took a deep breath. After the extreme workout, he too felt his muscles and veins starting to ache. However, he did not stop there. His expression changed slightly and he shouldered the dark halberd and chased after them from afar. The results of the battle stunned everyone who was watching. The Shang dynasty side erupted in cheers, their morale reaching such a peak one could almost see it burn ferociously. Guifang, on the other hand, started to retreat. The tables had turned because of the power of one man. Chapter 24. The Guifang Queen. Since the battle between both sides began, it was the first time the Guifang soldiers were forced to retreat during a direct confrontation. While that was happening with Guifang, Shang dynasty was experiencing an unprecedented rush of morale. The soldiers roared, as if letting off steam. They had finally done justice to make up for their past failures. On the city walls, Deng Ju had forgotten about his fatigue as he rushed to the top of the walls and grabbed hold of the drumsticks, drumming with ferocity. At that moment, the thunderous drumming moved the heavens and the horns blared with overwhelming excitement. Xia Ji gripped his dark halberd tightly and rushed forward. He was not bothered by the retreating Guifang soldiers that were left in his dust. He was focused on chasing the group of frost giants. The frost giants fled in a stampede that shook heaven and earth. They were breathless and realized that their spiked clubs would only serve to slow them down. So, they threw their weapons away and started running with wild speed while hugging their heads. A strange ebb and flow pattern started to emerge on the battlefield. The frost giants ran the fastest at the front. Behind them, the Shang dynasty's 7th imperial prince chased after them with a speed to match. Further behind the back of the 7th imperial prince were the retreating Guifang soldiers, exotic tribes, and bandits. Right behind them were the Red Leopard camp and the swordsmen from the martial arts world of the imperial capital. The 2 parties at the forefront ran faster than the rest and it was not long before those behind had completely lost sight of them. Deng Gongjio looked worried as he said, "Oh no, His Highness has gone all the way to the front." Despite the pang of worry, all he felt right now was passion burning in his bloodstream for having the privilege of being a follower of such an invincible imperial prince. Besides that, with his understanding of Guifang, they did not seem like a tribe who would set up traps. The ambush at Wolf Restraining Pass was an exception, an arrangement specifically planned out by the king of Guifang. It would be wiser to be worried about his own predicament first. Deng Jiugong got rid of unnecessary thoughts from his mind and grabbed tight onto his green dragon sword as he focused on engaging the enemy bandits. They were now far away from where the battlefield was. The frost giants bolted at inhuman speeds. They ran and stole glances back at the same time, spotting the black-armored monster still hot on their tails under the moonlight. They all gave out pitiful wails. As the top warrior, Luo Luo ran much faster than the others, kicking dust behind him. However, it did not matter how fast they ran. Xia Ji was already right there, not too far and not too close, persistently chasing after them. The frost giants realized they could not get rid of this most powerful black-armored shorty and started to take an unusual route. They began to climb the mountains. The giants had a physical advantage when climbing mountains. Their fingers had powerful strength that could easily dig into the rocks. Besides that, ice and frost could cling steadfastly to the sides, which enabled the giants to tramp over mountains and cross ravines. Xia Ji stood on a cliff and watched as the giants started to make the climb. He did not fall behind as his hands activated the 18 levels of hell suppression energy, which allowed him to go through mountains and cut through rocks. He was as agile as an ape as he pursued his quarry closely. The frost giants passed over a cliff and continued running as they turned back to look. All they saw was a clear figure in black armor tailing them like death himself amidst the pure white snow. The frost giants let out another collective pitiful wail. Some had even turned their heads around and started roaring in rage for no apparent reason. However, they never stopped running despite the continuous roaring. They continued running. He continued chasing. Just like that, the pursuit lasted for half the day. They ran from midnight to dawn and continued from dawn to noon. Xia Ji had the help of the inner vitality of the 9 suns, which supplied unlimited recovery for him. Running did not exhaust too much of his energy. In fact, he was gradually recuperating from the fatigue he felt from the previous close-quarters combat. Finally, the frost giants ran into a valley, which was covered in thick ice and snow. Xia Ji followed immediately and observed his surroundings carefully. Suddenly, his gaze caught onto something. From afar, he saw numerous mystic blue beings sporting huge bellies. There were quite a lot of them. Is this where the frost giants set up camp? 3,000 frost giants are all here. He gave his right hand a shake and pointed the dark halberd in a slant fashion toward the snow in front of him. He stood his ground on the outskirts of the giants' campsite. As for the frost giants who ran all the way, they were finally back at their camp. Their arrival had woken up the giants who were sleeping, and every one of them with the huge belly stood up. Close to 3,000 pairs of eyes shot unfriendly stares at the black-armored shorty who had followed the others so casually into the valley. However, Luo Luo and the other frost giants who had escaped back to camp quickly started conversing with the others. They communicated with unknown words. Close to 3,000 pairs of giant eyes started to reveal fear. Their limited brain capacities finally understood one thing: he was no ordinary black-armored shorty. He was the most powerful black-armored shorty. With that, the giants stood up one after the other as they held their huge clubs in front of them as a form of protection. They roared at Xia Ji from afar. Oddly, Xia Ji managed to translate what they had meant. "Oh, damn it, don't come over here. Don't you come over. Hey, we're talking to you. Don't come here. I swear, if you take another step forward, I will beat you up, I swear." Xia Ji took a step forward. One of the frost giants suddenly gave an angry roar as he circulated his strength to throw a giant rock at that black-armored monster from afar. Xia Ji caught the rock easily and threw it back with added violence. The giant rock crashed to the ground. The earth trembled. 3,000 pairs of eyes stared at the giant rock. The giants pondered the power needed to do this, and a more pronounced fear filled each of their faces as they eventually retreated even more. Xia Ji found this funny. These frost giants truly had a naive and simple brain. It had never crossed their minds that if they had tried to chase him away as a group, he would most certainly have to make a run for it. Instead, the extent of these giants' thoughts was, if our strongest warrior could not defeat him, then I stand no chance against him, or to put it in another way, These huge blocks of ice only knew to utilize their savage strength and the blood flowing within them. They were not well versed in battle, much less being proficient with martial arts. They were also scared of death and occupied a rather extreme spectrum of bullies who only knew how to fear the strong and trod on the weak. Xia Ji had no idea whether to cry or laugh over this. He moved forward a few more steps but decided to stop. He would still be able to handle a couple of dozen frost giants, but there were 3,000 giants here. Besides that, he did not come all the way here to engage in a slaughterfest with the giants. He had never killed a giant before this, not because the giants' ice and frost blood froze their wounds too quickly, but rather, he had other thoughts deep down in his mind. Hopefully, I'm able to wait for it. Xia Ji stopped in his tracks and started to wait patiently. Far away from him, 3,000 frost giants began to get into a sudden argument. Luo hugged his head and gave a roar that was difficult to decipher. Xia Ji really wanted to know what they were saying, but he could not communicate in their language. The only thing he sensed was the violent rage from the tallest, biggest frost giant's roar, which seemed to also insinuate that this giant was also a tyrant at home. Before long, someone a size smaller than the rest was pushed out by the giants. It was a small-sized person, who was only 1.8 meters tall. The person had silver hair and blue eyes, with snow-white skin as fair as ice and frost, and had an exotic air about their person. The girl's mystic blue eyes stared at Xia Ji. Surprisingly, she spoke the language of the Central Plain fluently. I'm the master of Guifang and the daughter of the Frost Giant's top warrior Luo. My name is Tu Luo. Xia Ji gave a sigh of relief as he smiled. His wait was over. This was the person he was looking for. She was also the reason he came here with an inkling of hope. His thoughts were simple: if Guifang was able to receive the services of 3,000 Frost Giants, there must have been a middleman. This master of Guifang was obviously the middleman. She was a child of mixed heritage who had the blood of the Frost Giants flowing in her. As for how she was born, there was no need to get into details. The thoughts flashed across his mind before Xia Ji called out loudly, I am the 7th imperial prince of the Shang dynasty, Xia Ji. Tu Luo was taken aback. She clearly did not expect that this monster, who is absolutely not one of those common shorties emphasized continuously by the Frost Giants, would be someone of such lofty status. So, the Guifang queen replied plainly, you are very powerful. Father and my 2 uncles tell me you're a monster. We, Guifang, and the Frost Giants have always shown respect to true warriors. Since the Imperial City has you, we will not attack the Imperial City. From this day onward, we will avoid any place you are present. If you stand guard at the Wolf Restraining Pass, we shall not siege the borders. Xia Ji suddenly said, what if I tell you this is not the reason why I'm here? Her expression curious, Tu Luo asked, then what do you seek here? Xia Ji, for an alliance. Tu Luo asked again with curiosity, are you looking to forge an alliance with us to go after Tujue and Quanrong? From what I gather, your side has a political marriage with Tujue. Xia Jie replied, no. I'm asking for a personal alliance with all of you. Tu Luo suddenly understood what this was about. So, that is why you've only wounded father and my uncles, but did not kill any of the Frost Giants. Xia Jie smiled. He did not deny it. From the very beginning, his aim was never to guard the Imperial City, nor was it to slaughter all of Guifang and the Frost Giants. What he wanted was to increase his power and control, and to have a hidden card up his sleeve which he could play. Tu Luo said, I'll need to discuss this with my father and uncles. With that, she turned to speak to the other giants in roars. The 3 Frost Giants who were 10 meters tall conversed as they turned their heads toward Xia Ji's direction. Soon, Tu Luo walked out and said, my father and uncle said that they are willing to form a friendship with a true powerhouse. However, what exactly do you want us to do for you? Xia Ji smiled and said, I just want to be friends. Friends. I just need help extended to me whenever you can when I need it. Right now, the entire Shang dynasty treats all of you as the enemy. If the Shang dynasty and Tujue get on good terms, they would surround and attack you come spring and summer. You have Tujue on your west, Luosha at the north, and Quanrong in the south. Would Quanrong and Luosha offer to aid you? The Frost Giants may be powerful, but you are influenced greatly by the seasons. If the records on the ancient books are accurate, frost giants need to retreat into your underground ice cellars during the peak of summer, or make an early journey to the northern mountain and rivers to hibernate during summer to bypass the hottest time of the year. When that moment arrives, it will spell the end of you. Tu Luo gave this some consideration and replied, "You're completely right." Xia Ji said, "However, I can help you, and right now, I need your help in return. At least till before springtime." Tu Luo said, "Can the 7th Imperial Prince provide more details?" Xia Ji said, "Why not?" Tu Luo displayed quite the courage as well as superior insight as she walked directly towards Xia Ji. Some of the giants wanted to follow her, but she raised her hand to inform them it was unnecessary. On the other side, Xia Ji was also walking toward her calmly. They looked at each other and later sat slowly down at the center where a table formed naturally of stone was situated. Xia Ji laughed as he said, "Your Highness, just see for yourself. Our initial trust for each other can be formed just like that, isn't that right?" Tu Luo laughed as well. "In that case, 7th Imperial Prince, why don't we chat openly and honestly about how we should become friends?" Chapter 25. I did not truly know your Highness at first meeting and only knew you as a common Imperial Prince. 6 hours later, Xia Ji and the Guifang Queen finished negotiating their secret deal. They next exchanged tokens of trust and a password before taking their leaves. Xia Ji returned to the imperial capital. As for Tu Luo, she immediately led her army to attack another city, with the exotic tribes and rogue bandits in tow like jackals and wolves following tigers and leopards, seeking a portion of whatever spoils that was left over. Guifang might have suffered a huge loss battling the imperial capital, but they were not hurt anywhere that was of consequence because none of the 3,000 frost giants had died. Besides that, the Guifang army had spread out quite widely after sieging the wolf restraining pass. The imperial capital had lost 3,000 to 4,000 men, but there were still more than 70,000 people remaining at the pass. Tu Luo's attack path had been planned out clearly. She would bring along the frost giants to stand guard over the central army. After that, she would send wave after wave of Guifang troops to pillage and kill everywhere they went. If they encountered a strong enemy, she would send out the frost giants, who would be able to effectively turn the tides to their favor. As for the central army, where would it be located? Wherever the Guifang Queen, Tu Luo, was, that would be the central army. She would continue traveling along with the frost giants. That was why there was no permanent location for the central army. The Guifang army would pillage and snatch materials and goods while she went looking for something much more important, namely skills and divine weapons. An army was necessary during a battle and it was a permanent fixture in war. However, when the standards of both armies were not that far apart, the one thing that stood between victory and defeat was superior strength. That was why during the siege at the border of the mighty pass that was strong enough for wolf restraining, Tu Luo employed 3,000 frost giants during a night of snowstorm to attain victory by obliterating the heir apparent and his elite army of 100,000. Even though the imperial capital had been weakened and was fragile as an egg, with Xia Ji's presence and his high-level battle power that snatched victory in the slaughterfest, the frost giants sent out by Tu Luo were rendered completely useless. Guifang was left with nothing but the lives of their soldiers to continue with the fight. This was not to Guifang's advantage, which was why they had retreated. This did not mean that Guifang was unable to take down the imperial city, but the price to pay for attacking the imperial city was too high. If they had to sacrifice so many battalions just to take over one city, it would not mean a thing. Preventing losses was a factor that should be considered by any worthy monarch. Choosing your enemies and allies was another. That was why the Guifang Queen was willing to forge an alliance with this young imperial prince. After that, Tu Luo developed a deep interest in the imperial prince's background. It was because she had heard about some stories of the imperial prince's past. He had studied Buddhist scriptures deep within the palace for more than 2 years with neither protest nor complaint. When the imperial emperor escaped, he left the imperial prince behind to guard the city. Under such circumstances, the imperial prince had displayed extraordinary power and had even defeated Tu Luo's father and 2 uncles. These circumstances could not be explained as a mere fortuitous encounter. Only one thing was clear: this young imperial prince possessed an extraordinary disposition. He possessed the qualities of absolute forbearing as well as madness, calmness and wild passion, divine and demonic characteristics. Such a person was completely worthy of establishing an alliance with Guifang on his own. At least, that was what Tu Luo thought. That was the reason she had built the foundation of a long-serving friendship with the 7th imperial prince of the Shang dynasty with her status as Guifang's queen. They would be able to establish a certain level of offensive and defensive alliance in these turbulent times. This winter, the friendship between both parties would begin to grow. She would take extra care to cherish it. Within the palace, Xia Ji made himself a cup of hot tea as he sat by lake watching located deep within the palace. He started to focus intently on engraving his prayer beads. He wanted to increase the number of prayer beads and make this secret trump card even stronger. By his side was Eunuch Mei, who was standing in a slight bow with his head lowered. His hands were holding a jade box. There was an iron hand attached to where his right hand used to be. Although he was not used to it, it was still better with having no hand at all. Xia Ji had completed engraving 75 wooden beads and placed them neatly into a wooden box. He took a sip of tea and looked at the jade box in Eunuch Mei's hands. He commented, "The steward would rather kill himself after losing the bet than telling me the truth and serving me." Eunuch Mei immediately approached him and placed the jade box onto the table. He opened the box to reveal a book, 2 cans of embroidery needles, and a token of authority. This was left behind by the steward. There's the sacred sunflower scroll, air-penetrating embroidery needles, and a token of authority for 800 soldiers of sacrifice. Xia Ji glanced at them. Did he say anything else? Eunuch Mei immediately replied, "The steward committed suicide after taking this. All he said before his death was, 'Beware of imperial concubine Wan. Beware of imperial concubine Wan.'" Xia Ji mumbled, "Does he think that those words would be enough to compensate for his failure to follow through with the bet?" The young imperial prince looked at the lake's reflection from the light of dawn and suddenly sighed with emotion. Forget about it. That old dog has been quite a loyal person after all. Bury him. Should there be a grand funeral? No. Just give him a burial place. Yes, Your Highness. I'll get it done immediately. Dig deeper. Don't let the hungry wild dogs dig him up for food. Your Highness is benevolent. I understand what to do. When Eunuch Mei was far away, Xia Ji took out the sacred sunflower scroll. He flipped through it, page after page, and read out in a low voice, "To cultivate this divine skill, one must lead the knife to castrate oneself. Cultivate pills and ingest the medicine, integrate internally and externally. The path to cultivating inner vitality now is nothing more than the thought of guidance. It's too indistinct to be true. Heaven and earth are distinguished while corruption gives birth to men. The inner vitality cultivation of men is nothing more than cultivating a non-existent soul and dispelling the turbid. One with inner vitality would master one's life, one with the form could utilize it with his body." He finished reading it after 2 hours. A purple skill bead appeared within his primal spirit with the notification, "Sacred Sunflower Scroll, 9th level." All he did was save it for now. He had no need to use it immediately. He placed the skill book back where it was and removed the token of authority for the 800 soldiers of sacrifice. These 800 soldiers of sacrifice were the same 800 blocking every door of the imperial palace. It was because of them that no one was able to leave the imperial harem within the palace. These 800 people were made up of guards who were much more capable and stronger than the usual guards. The unique thing about them was the way they were trained and nurtured by their house rules. These 800 would only obey the token of authority and not the individual. Whoever had the token was their master. The imperial emperor must really trust the steward to have been willing to pass the token of authority to him. In fact, the steward did not let him down in terms of trust. However, these 800 people were now the first sign of power Xia Ji had in his hands, that he was able to give orders. The second would be the tiger tally. However, even though he was the Grand Marshal of the world, that was nothing but an empty title bestowed upon him by the imperial emperor. If it was not for the fact that the imperial emperor was sure he would die, such a title would never be given to him. The tiger tally could only serve to mobilize the imperial capital army, which were the soldiers serving under Deng Zhu. There were originally 50,000 of them, but the number had been halved after the battle. Xia Ji was making plans with every card he had in his hand when footsteps could be heard coming from afar. A palace guard rushed in with his head lowered and stood next to Lake watching before kneeling down to say, "Reporting to Your Highness, General Deng is requesting for an audience with you." Xia Ji replied, "Bring Deng Zhu here." "Yes, Your Highness." After a moment, Deng Ju arrived at the lakeside. Xia Ji pointed to the other side of the marble table and said, "Sit." He picked up the teapot and poured a cup of tea, smiling as he said, "I wasn't able to invite you for tea before the battle. I'll make it up to you today." Deng Ju was taken aback, but remembered the first time he had met His Highness in the library loft. During that time, His Highness had said that, "I won't be inviting you to have tea with the situation being so tense right now," and he had replied gruffly that, "What tea should a man who is about to have his head hung around another's waist have?" The thought of it reminded Deng Ju of how he failed to recognize the greatness of this person. He had even believed His Highness would escape, and in the end, His Highness's achievements were equivalent to giving him a viciously sharp slap on the face. However, Deng Ju liked being slapped on the face this way, and he was fond of His Highness similarly. So, he smiled as he smoothed down his beard and said openly, "I must be short-sighted from old age. I did not truly know your Highness at our first meeting and only saw you as a common imperial prince. I made you witness an embarrassing scene." They stared into the distance as the morning sun began to rise. The clear, sparkling lights lit up a corner of the post-battle imperial capital. Even though peace had arrived, 1,000,000 refugees had come pouring in, causing the imperial city to be unusually chaotic. Deng Ju sipped his tea slowly and suddenly said, "Your Highness, I've investigated the background of the 100 soldiers. The results looked normal." Xia Ji was not surprised as he nodded. Deng Ju made a sudden change in topic and asked again, "Your Highness, what is it that you want exactly?" Xia Ji looked at him. Deng Ju said, "I've said it the other day. If your Highness returns, the Deng family will serve only you. That is the reason I'm here. I'd like to inquire what are your plans from here onward in order to make early preparations." Part 2 of the series ends here. Thank you for watching and listening. If you find it interesting, please give us a like, a comment and a subscription so that we have the motivation to make the next videos.